All right. So, Tom, first off, thank you for your willingness to do this and meet with our group. I know that you're very generous with your time. So just to introduce who Tom is to the group, Tom is by profession, he's a retired physicist. He worked for NASA. And Tom, correct me if I'm wrong, but doing risk analysis for complex systems. So
That's
like,
right.
Tom would do things like calculate if a little screw was off here or there, if it would, impact the, flight trajectory and in what way. And were you going to say something, Tom?
No, I can maybe get you off the hook here a little.
Sure.
It basically is looking at all the things that could possibly go wrong and what the probability of each one of those is. Because things that go wrong usually follow a logic stream. If this part fails, that causes the next part to be stressed, which changes its probability of failure, which causes the next part to not get the information it needs, which causes these other problems, which may cause something else to fail. And so on it goes. And 10 or 20 levels through a very complex system, nobody has any idea, really, what could happen and the path that it might take to happen. So that's what my job was to map out all the possibilities and then the probability of those possibilities, and then run simulations so that one could see what was likely, what was most likely to go wrong and end up in a catastrophe. And, what was maybe likely to go wrong, but really wouldn't make much difference because redundant systems maybe, would fill in and that sort of thing. So at the end, I could give them a list of things by priority of where to spend your money first in making the system more robust and less likely to, have a failure. So that was basically it. And I'd done the same thing in a couple of other avenues for other government institutions, and NASA was kind of the last one I did. Had a lot of fun with it. It's interesting problems because there's so many variables and so many possibilities that you need to have not only a good understanding of the physics of the interactions, but of the probabilities.
And in addition to that, your other vocation, if you will, was consciousness exploration, and it has been since you met
Yes.
Robert Monroe back in the 1970s. So for those of you who don't know, Robert Monroe was a consciousness explorer. He began having out-of-body experiences at a certain point, didn't know what they were, and there was nothing medically or psychologically wrong with him that his doctors could see. And so he just decided that we're going to explore this thing and see, what the potential of it is. So he had written 3 different books. And when Tom was in graduate school, you had come upon Bob's first book, which was Journeys Out of the Body, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then basically, long story short, had met with Bob and volunteered to help Bob Monroe create this laboratory where they would do experiments with meditation and out-of-body states. And Tom and his colleague Dennis Menerick, who was an engineer, would help them do all the science if Bob would train them how to get into different states of consciousness and to have out-of-body experiences. And so then Tom had helped them build this laboratory and he was really helped in the you guys basically invented the hemisync technology, which helps people to get into these different states of consciousness. And there was a period of, you said like 1 or 2 years where for 21 hours a week, all you guys were doing is manipulating your consciousness in different ways with Bob.
Yeah, that's true. Actually, my adventures in consciousness started at about 5, 6, 7 years old when I found myself floating out of body, and then ended up with some entities who explained to me how to control that and how to do it, and then started me on some sort of training regimen to do that. Interesting thing was that I was 5 or 6 or 7 years old when I was, my body was when I was doing this, but as soon as I got into the out of body state, I was not a child anymore. I was an adult. And that was just a very odd situation to be an adult and do these exercises and then know that you were going to come back to the body of a 6-year-old. It was a little disorienting, but fun just the same. But that got shut down somewhere around 7, 8 years old because those who were training me thought that it would be good for me to be a little more normal than what I was shaping up to be that way, in that I needed to grow yet a personality and other things. And I had to fit in a little better than I was fitting in. So that got shut down and got reawakened when I started working with Bob.
I see. Very cool. Yeah, there are a lot of folks that have similar experiences. They have a lot of psychic or spiritual experiences when they're children. And then as they get older, they lose it a bit, and then they kind of come back to it as they get into their 20s or 30s. Yeah. So, so cool. Yeah. And just to introduce kind of who this group is, we are all alumni of a course called the Finder's Course, or present participants, perhaps soon to be alumni. And so basically, we're all familiar with this idea of enlightenment or spiritual awakening, or when your inner peace begins to develop to a certain degree, where that kind of ongoing inner peace state just becomes who you are, which is that we could call that one defining aspect of the enlightenment process. And there was a social scientist named Jeffrey Martin who basically did extensive interviews and research on a number of these people who are in this persistent inner peace state, or a persistent, universal love type of state. And he really tried to figure out what it was that they did in terms of techniques and, methods and practices that allowed them to entrain this state. And then he basically made a practical immersion type of internet-based course based on those techniques and practices. And so we've all kind of been through that. And a lot of us have had changes in our own consciousness. And we're still in a process of understanding what this, what the whole process of enlightenment is, or we could, some people call it non-duality or awakening, or we could just say broadly spiritual evolution. And I know you and I had started a conversation about 2 years ago at the first International Congress on Consciousness, where you were a speaker. And we'd started a conversation about enlightenment. And, you said, there was just one point in our conversation where you just said, well, Michael, I think we need to do another interview. So that's what this is.
Okay.
Yeah. And I know in our recent email exchange, you said it's a much neglected topic, and, you'd be glad to speak about it.
Sure. Yeah. One thing that I would comment on that you said, that this study was done of how these people seemed to do the things they did, but the key isn't doing what they did or doing what they do. The key is being who they are. It's not a matter of doing nearly so much as it is a matter of being. Though the doing can give us some hints and can help guide us into different states of being. I see your kitty cat is joining you on the desk there.
Oh, yeah.
But the key isn't the doing. It's not the technique that is important. What's important is who you are, you at the being level, not you at the intellectual level trying to understand theory and technique and apply the technique properly. It's you at the being level is really where, is what enlightenment is talking about. So technique won't take you there, but it may help you find it on your own. Right.
Yeah. And that's been our experience too, that, so one, and this is a distinction. So we're going to have kind of, some technology, some terminology from this class that we've all been in. And there's terminology from your books, your trilogy, My Big Toe, and a lot of your lectures. So Tom likes to make the distinction between the intellectual level and the being level, what we think or what we believe, and then who and what we really are. So yeah, we could say that this class, I think, for many people predisposed many changes at the being level.
Okay. Yeah, well, we'll just have to stumble over our different metaphors until we figure out what each other means, but that won't take too long.
Yeah. So in terms of spiritual awakening, let's say, or you would call it, I think, entropy reduction or noise reduction. You've used that metaphor before. What would you say are the necessary conditions for that, or what would you say is the primary thread of that process?
The process to attain spiritual awakening. That's the question. Oh, I lost your audio.
Yes, right. Well, for instance, you had made a comment in passing that you haven't experienced anger in something like 30 years, and that your predominant emotional state is positive. So, I mean, you're probably, if we were to do a bell curve of the emotions that most people experience, you'd probably be in, the upper echelon of well-being, so to speak. And so to a group like ours, that's very interesting. We interview people like you.
So the question is kind of, how do you get there?
Yeah. What would you say the process of unfolding entails? And if anybody wants to chime in to help clarify what you think I'm asking, you can feel free.
Okay, well, I can work at that. There's lots of ways we could approach that because there's lots of different avenues, to get there. There's not just one path, and everybody has to, figure out that one path and do that one technique and get to that point. It's not like that. There's lots of different ways that you can approach this sort of thing. Now, in the if we did the short answer, like the 10 words or less kind of answer, so we look at the big picture kind of answer, it would be you need to get rid of your fear, which means also let go of your ego and let go of your beliefs. Okay, now that's a 10 word or less answer to how you get there. Those are the key things you need to let go of. Now, there's a lot of processes to do that. And as we do that, we tend to get a bigger and bigger picture of the nature of our reality, who we are, how we relate to the whole, our connection to the larger reality, if you will, to the whole, to consciousness, or if you're of a religious bent, to God. It's how do you have, what is that connection? And as you get a bigger picture, then you start to see things with a different perspective. And suddenly things that used to make you angry or upset, using anger as just an example here, just don't anymore. Because in a different perspective, it's not about you. It's not saying, it's not, that insult perhaps that makes you angry. You realize that insult is really not about you. It's about the person who said it. And if anything, the feeling you have isn't one of defense and then retribution. The feeling that you have is compassion for that individual who has that viewpoint. And you wonder how they ended up with that viewpoint and what might you be able to say or do, if anything, that would help them see a bigger picture or would help them maybe see a different viewpoint. And of course, the answer to that question isn't give them a lecture and tell them what it is they've got wrong. That never helps. That always is gasoline onto the fire. That always makes it worse. That's your ego and your fear that deliver that. So that's a short answer. Another thing that happens as you grow up in the bigger picture, which is maybe another metaphor for enlightenment, is that you have an ever larger, what I call decision space. You see, we're here, we make choices. That's what consciousness does. Consciousness is a choice maker, and we make choices. And the number of choices that we know about is not necessarily all the choices they are. Often there are options and choices that we don't know, and that's because probably we have beliefs that eliminate some of those choices, we have fears that eliminate some of those choices, and we have ego that eliminates some of those choices. But the amount of choices that we have that we can look at and say, oh, here's something that happened. Here's an event that requires a choice for me. As you become more grown up, those numbers of choices goes up rather dramatically. And that means your reality grows dramatically. So you start living in a larger reality. Your everyday reality is not the same as it used to be. You see, as you grow up, your reality changes. You don't live in that same reality. You've got more choices. You see more connections. You understand more things at a deeper level. And you eventually begin to live in that larger reality, a reality that most people aren't living in. And if we want to tie this into meditation, we'd say that meditation puts you in a different reality frame. Okay, you're in a meditation frame, and in a meditation frame, you tend to have a bigger picture. That's what meditation's good for. You get rid of the noise, and when you get rid of all the noise and the thoughts, you now can focus your attention on bigger issues, bigger things, broader perspectives. So meditation takes you to that place. That's one of the avenues one of the things that you can do. Again, it's not a matter of doing things. It's a matter of being different. Growing up means being different, not just channeling, more knowledge. It means being different. So eventually, you see, you let meditation go because you are in a meditation state all the time. Your life is a meditation. Your choices are meditation. So it's not like you go and meditate at this time of day for a half an hour or whatever, or an hour or whatever you do. You live it. You don't do it. You live it. And you live in this larger space. And when you do, you see things differently. So when that somebody comes up and gives you that insult, you don't see an insult. You don't see a challenge to your ego. You don't see a challenge to your, authority or whatever else you think you might have. You see another person who has a particular viewpoint, and what can you do to make that better? What can you do to help that person, let go of some of that fear, let go of some of that angst, some of those issues that are making them unhappy. Well, I just got a close-up of my picture, and I see it's a little out of focus. I don't know if that's a problem for this or not, but anyway, the rest of you don't see it as out of focus? All right, maybe it's just my glasses. Maybe I'm the one that's out of focus. Well, anyway, that's that's another aspect of this growing up and seeing a bigger picture. You just see things differently. You function differently. When you live in a bigger picture, there's all sorts of information available to you that isn't available to people living in a smaller picture. In a bigger picture, you understand. Say if you're having this conversation, and we have this, you started with an example of somebody, or being angry or experiencing anger. Let's say there is somebody who's real rude to you. You can understand their feeling. You can feel their feeling. You can see the world through their eyes. You can feel their angst, their unhappiness. You can feel their pain. You can understand why they're lashing out like that because you can feel it. You can be a part of it. You can, if you want, if you're, not interested in the feeling aspects, but more of the intellectual aspects, you can look at the database and see a lot about this person. There's things like their spiritual attainment, their health, their past experiences. You can you can see where they're coming from and how they got there. And all of this data is available to you because you're living your life in a meditation state, basically, in a state where all those things are available. And it's not I'm here and then I'm there. I do this and then I go someplace else to do that. It's all part of an organic whole thing that is just the way you are. You're in a bigger reality. And in that bigger reality, all these things are just available to you. Like in the small reality, things are just available to you to a certain degree. And that comes with the greater choices. Greater information base provides you with greater choices. So one of the choices now that you have is a choice not to be angry, a choice to be caring instead. And that becomes a viable choice, where if you have the fear and the ego and the beliefs, then though that choice to not be angry is still there, you could make it theoretically, you don't make it because it's not in that set of choices of which you can choose. You see, your free will can only choose one of the choices that you are aware of. And the choices that you're not aware of, some of those you have to grow up to access. So it's not a matter of what do you do, what do you say, how do you interact. It's just a different way of being. It's living in a reality that's a little larger than the smaller reality. It's always easier to look downstream. In other words, to understand people whose realities are smaller is very easy when your reality is bigger. But to look upstream at people whose realities are bigger when yours is a little smaller, that's very, very difficult, because you don't have the experience, the information, the understanding to understand what it is they're feeling, doing, thinking, being. You can't do that because that's not part of your experience set yet. So upstream is very difficult. So when you guys are looking at these people they study, you're looking upstream, perhaps. And looking upstream is a hard thing to do. And we end up categorizing it and trying to find similarities, and what is similar in all these things, and how do they all tie together, and what's the underlying themes and currents. And, so we're cataloging and categorizing and trying to build some kind of an intellectual model on what's going on there, with the idea that, well, once I know what's going on there, then I just have to be it, and I'm done. That helps me grow up. Well, growing up is not an intellectual process. Growing up is an irrational process. It's not one that you can think your way to. It's one you have to be your way to. You have to change who you are and the way you see the world. It's a reality change as you go. So that's, I don't know if I've hit your question or not. Maybe I've hit several of them, but anyway, that's maybe a good intro into, what is enlightenment and growing up, and how do you get into that process. It's not a doing thing, it's a being thing. And being comes from change. And when you change yourself at the being level, you are different. You're not the same person. It doesn't mean you have new facts in your head that now you can, do an analysis at a higher level. That's not it. It's that you are a different person. And generally, in the 10 words or less answer, that means you've reduced fear. That means you've reduced ego and you've let go of beliefs. Now, why do I add beliefs to that? Most of that you don't hear beliefs that often. You hear reduce the fear, reduce the ego. You'll hear that in lots of places. But beliefs belong in that same box, because when you have a belief, you shut yourself off from the information that conflicts with that belief. Because if you have a belief and information comes in that's contrary to that belief, well, that's just an anomalous point. That's spurious data. That's an error somehow. It doesn't really belong there. So you find ways to excuse data that doesn't match with your beliefs, the way you think the world is. So you toss them away. And that is not helpful. You see, you cut yourself off from information that's useful to you than whenever you have a belief. So my idea is that you have to always be open-minded to everything, and you have to always be skeptical of everything. Always skeptical, always open-minded. So you have no beliefs, because a belief would be a probability of 1 or a 0. Right? You believe that this is it, that's a probability of 1, or this isn't it, that's a probability of 0. But you'll have very, very few of those. And the ones you have that are probabilities of 1s and 0s, the things you really know, those are usually trivial, basic things. They're not complex things. They're very simple things, you see. But as the world gets more complex, we tend to feel like we want to know so badly that if we don't have all the facts, we make up a belief, and now we feel better. See, that belief makes us feel better, because I call that pseudo knowledge. Now we have pseudo knowledge because we don't have that stress of not knowing and can't get there from here. So we make up a belief, and now we know. We feel a whole lot better, but it's just a belief. It has no particular correlation with truth. It's just a belief that makes you feel better. Rather than that, the better thing to do is, if you don't know, try to do an assessment of about how true you think it is. Is that maybe 30% likely to be true, or 99%, or 99.99, or what? But very seldom do you pick a 1 or a 0. So you always stay open-minded. You take your information in, and based on your own personal experience, not on other people's experience, because if it's on other people's experience, now it's back to belief again. You see, you can only believe or disbelieve somebody else's experience. So when you look at these people who are studied and look at their experience, you're in a box. You can believe the things they tell you or not believe the things they tell you. Believe the metaphors they use or don't believe the metaphors they use. You can't know, because it's their experience, not your experience. So if it's not your experience, it's not your truth. It has to be your experience. You get an experience. Based on your experience, you decide about the probability of this being true or false. And you put that on your scale. And then in the back of your mind, you think, well, when data comes, more data will always come. When it comes, I maybe will change that probability. I may raise it a little, I may lower it a little. But very seldom, like I say, do you ever get a 1 or a 0. So that's the process of going through this. That's why it's a growing process, not an intellectual process. You see, it's not that you have to find out all the facts. That's not the point. It's not a fact-based thing. You have to grow up. You have to change who you are. You have to be open, but you have to be skeptical. Take nothing. And the thing you have to be most skeptical about, of all things of being skeptical, the things you have to be most skeptical about is yourself, your own ideas, your own conclusions, your own probabilities that you've given things. Is something you gave it a 0.9, and now you move it to a 0.99 because you'd be very skeptical of any of those things. Well, what does this mean? It means you have to live gracefully with uncertainty. You're not going to get certainty. What a belief does is gives us certainty. Well, I believe it, that's the way it is, now I'm certain, I don't have to worry about that anymore. You have to learn to live gracefully with uncertainty. Your life is very uncertain. You get data, you process it, you do the best you can with what you've got, and you go on. Then you be aware of the feedback you get from those choices you make. And if the feedback says that was a good choice, that worked out really well, then you do more of that. Okay. If it turned out that wasn't such a good feedback from that choice, you do less of that. It lowers down on your probability of good things to do. So that's life. So you'll find that these people who the study was about, these people didn't live with any sort of rigid code, or if they did, they were all different. You won't find much there. That's not the thing. The thing is that you have to be open. You have to have no fear. You have to have no ego, and you have to have no beliefs. Now, having 0 in all of those is probably an impossible place to get to. That's probably not something that one does. And here's why. Basically, what we're talking about, I describe in terms of entropy. Okay, it's the entropy of your consciousness. As you have more fear, beliefs, and ego, your entropy goes up. Entropy is a measure of disorder. As you have less fear, ego, and beliefs, your entropy goes down. So consciousness is evolving toward low entropy states. A low entropy consciousness is what we call love. Love is the nature of a low entropy consciousness. Okay, so we're trying to lower our entropy. Now, if we had 0 fear, 0 ego, and 0 beliefs, and maybe I should say that ego and beliefs are usually a product of fear. So fear is really the main thing. The ego and the beliefs are just there because of the fear. You get rid of the fear and the ego and beliefs go away as well. So I keep enumerating the ego and the beliefs rather than just say fear, because otherwise people misunderstand fear. They think of fear as like a big bear in the woods that's hungry, you know, and you run into one. And that they see fear as things that might do bodily harm. And we're talking about fears that are a lot more subtle than that. So if you get rid of that fear, what happens is you're lowering the entropy of your consciousness. Now, the reason I said that they probably never go to zero is because lowering entropy is a thing that you can approach zero entropy, but you don't get there. And this is going to make a major point about enlightenment. And that is, when you think you are enlightened, that's a very good sign that you most certainly are not. The reason for that is that you're lowering this entropy of your consciousness. When you get to the point that you say, I'm done, I'm enlightened now, you know, I've lowered the entropy all the way, it's zero, that's the point where your entropy begins to increase. Because to lower entropy takes effort, takes work. It takes, you got to try, you got to put effort and energy into lowering entropy. And as soon as you stop putting energy and effort into it, guess what? That entropy just starts to increase all by itself. It takes constant effort to maintain a state of low entropy. So that's why you never get there and get the, you know, kind of lie back and, you know, get your harp to play on the cloud, and you know, you've made it. You don't have to, you know, reincarnate in this miserable place anymore, et cetera, et cetera. I'm done. I'm out of here. I'm enlightened. That doesn't exist. There is no end point. You are always working toward that. And if you stop working, you start to backslide. So, you know, I could go into a lot of practical experiences about these things. I've been places, I've been to reality frames and where they were inhabited almost entirely by people who thought they were done, they were enlightened, and they were finished. And when it was time for them to go back and be helpful to other people, they didn't want to do that because they were done. Well, that tells you already that there's fear, there's ego, you know, it's all about love. It's all about caring. If it's about yourself, like I'm done, that's about you, that's ego. Well, that's not enlightened. So that's why I say, surely if you say, I'm done, you know, I'm enlightened, I'm out of here, I don't have anything else to learn, I know it all, that surely means that you are not, because you always have things to learn. You always have ways to grow up. There's always somebody else that needs help. And if it's about other, you're not done if there's somebody else that needs help and you could help them. You say, you're not done yet. You're only done if it's only about you. So that kind of, you know, then I guess I'm making the point that there is no such thing as enlightenment. Enlightenment is only a process. It's a journey. It's not an endpoint. You don't get to a point and then declare yourself to be enlightened. You don't get to a point where you say, I'm done, because there is no done. There's always somebody else that can use your help, somebody else that you can affect, something else that you can do to make the whole better, to make it work better, even if it's just by being an example. You don't have to be, you know, a big wheel in history or something like that and do marvelous things. You can be a little old lady that lives on a corner street that gives cookies to children, you know, in the afternoons because it makes them happy. You know, you don't have to be somebody that stands out as special. You just have things that you can always do. So that's kind of I'm giving you my thumbnail sketch of enlightenment and where it is, what it consists of, how you experience it, and, you know, its limitations as a destination. Mm-hmm. But it's very valuable as a process, as a journey. Absolutely. Yeah, I think most, if not all of us, are on the same page as to, you know, most, if not all of what you said. And if somebody else wants to say, you know, if other people have feedback that they want to give, they can feel free. So we've got 2 questions, and I just wanted to make one clarifying point. When you said you visited reality frames where folks are in, you know,
where I'll say that they're enlightened and so on. You're talking about an out-of-body state, or a state in consciousness exploration where you visited like a consensus reality like the physical,
Yes.
where these people were in some sort of inner peace state, and they said, look how wonderful everything is here, but then they didn't want to help anybody.
Yeah.
Was
Well,
that more or less it?
yeah, what it was is, yes, it was, you could call it an out of body. Okay. My metaphors and my language in my, in my work is, I call this a virtual reality. And when it's a virtual reality, there are lots of different realities. Like, there's World of Warcraft, and there's The Sims, and there's, what's the one with the stone and builders?
These are video games,
Yeah,
by the way.
these are all video games. Yeah, for you don't know, there's lots of virtual realities. Now there's No Man's Sky, and on they go. Well, each one of those is a data stream. It's just a data stream to the player. The data comes from the server, the computer, goes to the player. The computer receives it. The computer puts up a lot of little pixels, different colors and intensities on the screen, and the player, who's the consciousness of the avatar he's playing, makes all the choices. Okay, well, that's the way a virtual reality works. And to me, getting to another reality frame is just a matter of shifting data streams. If you want to go from World of Warcraft to The Sims, you just shift data streams. You just, and you don't really have to log off of one to log on to the other. You can have both of them up if you like. You just need two computer screens or a picture within picture screen. You can that's what I mean when you live in a bigger reality. You can log on to lots of other reality frames simultaneously if you wish. My experience is you get more than 4 or 5 and it gets very confusing. So there are limitations, practical limitations to how many realities you can live in at once. But those go up with experience. It's sometimes more difficult to do 2, but then 3 isn't so hard, and so on. They go up eventually. But I find I can do 4 all right. 5, I start getting confused as to who's on first. Starts to become a problem of keeping up with everything all the time, and it gets to where you're getting so thin in your resources that you're not really doing very well in any of them, because you're spread too thin. But anyway, that kind of digresses off the point.
Yeah. So sorry, just one more quick point of clarification, just so you're properly translated here among this group. And then Rebecca and then Kristen will ask their questions in that order. So Tom, you've used the analogy before of consciousness, or the larger consciousness system, or all that is, or reality as a whole, being like a sheet. And then there are individuated units of consciousness, which are our true self, so to speak, that are kind of lumps in that sheet. Waves in the ocean is another analogy that's been commonly used.
Sure.
And then our what you're calling an avatar would be our body or our personality in this lifetime, or this experience packet. That's another analogy that you used.
It wouldn't be our personality. That goes to consciousness. It would be our body. It's the physical world is a virtual world, and that's what I'm talking about, an avatar. That's this body.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. And so Rebecca, what was your question?
Well, Tom very wonderfully spoke to some of the aspect of my question, but I'm going to go ahead and ask it all. And I wrote it down because I'll forget what I'm going to say. One of the most influential books I read in my early 30s was the Urantia book. It took me 3 years to read it cover to cover. It significantly influenced my belief in spiritual evolution and set me on a course of seeking higher consciousness. My goal, I say it in quotes, for this life has been to reach the highest state of spiritual evolution possible in this lifetime. And I do realize that this is ever evolving with no end, and even going beyond this physical form experience. So my question is, and you have spoken to this some, can you speak to your understanding and your knowledge about spiritual evolution going beyond the human experience? Or is the concept of spiritual evolution just that, a concept or a belief?
No, spiritual evolution is what the game's all about.
Okay.
That's what we're here for. That's the whole point of it. We have consciousness, and I express that, as Michael said, I express the, all that is as consciousness. It's a consciousness system, okay? And that consciousness system is evolving, okay? And we are subsets of that, as Michael said. If that's a sheet, we're a hand puppet where somebody stuck their hand into that sheet and now has made a differentiation there. We're a differentiated piece of that consciousness, okay? So the system is evolving, and not only that, in order to evolve more efficiently, it broke itself into these pieces. It subdivided itself, these hand puppets, if you will, stuck into the sheet, and it gave them free will to interact with each other, because now there was some much richer possibility. There's a lot more decision space, if you will, you see, for everybody, because instead of one monolithic thing, you had all these individuated units of consciousness could interact with each other. So the possibilities went up, which means the choices went up, which means it's easier to evolve when there's more choices. You see, the only reason you stop evolving is there are no more choices. Then evolution kind of grinds to a halt because there's nothing else can change. You've worked out all the possibilities. Well, the more players you have in this, the more individuated units of consciousness interacting with each other, the more choice, the more evolution. Let's put it this way, the more efficient evolution is. All right. Now that's us. That's you and I. See, we're these individuated units of consciousness. We're still just part of the larger conscious system, but we're individuated units of consciousness. And what we do is we interact. And now we have our own spiritual growth. You see, as we grow up as individuated units, we lower our entropy, or you might say our, our love quotient. We become more like love, or we're a little more enlightened, however metaphor you'd like to use to do that. Well, I say it in terms of we lower our entropy, the entropy of our consciousness, okay? Well, when we lower our personal entropy, we're parts of the whole. The whole lowers its entropy because of us. So we individuated units of consciousness are one of the main strategies that the larger consciousness system has for its own evolution. Break into pieces, let the pieces interact. As the pieces evolve, it evolves because we're all one and the same. It's us and we're it. So not only is evolution, a thing, a possibility, it is the thing. That's what the system exists for. We're evolving. And that's why we're here in this virtual reality entropy reduction trainer. We're here, and that's what I call our physical universe. Okay? And we're here to make choices, to interact, and through those choices and our interaction, we either evolve toward becoming love, or we de-evolve toward becoming fear. And that's what we're here for. And we're part of the larger system strategy for its own evolution. As we evolve, it evolves. So we've got a job. Our job is to evolve the quality of our consciousness. That's the way I put it. Move more and more toward understanding and love and caring, and less toward self. And in doing that, we grow up and we change. And like we said, it's a never-ending thing, but that's the whole point. That is the point, is consciousness evolution. And we're evolving toward beings of love. And we can see that, this reality is part of a fractal process. We can see that in all sorts of things, at, say, lower level things. We started out this reality, now we'll just talk about our physical reality, just this physical reality. Okay, we started out with single cells, and the single cells learned to cooperate. And when they learned to cooperate, they made things that were multicelled. The multicelled things have lower entropy, more structure, less randomness, okay, more order. They were also then more capable and had more function. Okay, well now these multiple celled things learn to differentiate their cells to where they had cells that were the locomotion part and cells that were the defense part and cells that were the digestion part and so on. And that was now a bigger thing, and it took a lot more cells, a lot more cooperation because all these functions had to cooperate. And now we get up to people. Okay, we're one of those things. Okay, now the next step is for the people to work together, to cooperate, to care about each other, become interested in each other's growing up, in each other's happiness, if you will, or whatever. Happiness is a byproduct, but you know what I mean? That's where we're going. Now, we're not like cells. We're not going to fuse shoulder to shoulder with other beings because that's what, little biological cells did. We're a different kind of critter, but we have to learn. That's our step. That's the next step that humans have, is to make a bigger organism, because it'll be another bigger thing. It's not just a bunch of independent individuals like we are now as people, like the one-celled things were when they started. They make bigger things. We're going to make a bigger thing one day when we become very cooperative and caring and loving with each other. And that one bigger thing will be much lower entropy, much more efficient, and much more productive than what we have now. And that's not a hope. That's a certainty. We're going to get there. Why? Because this is evolution. Evolution of consciousness in this virtual reality. That's what it's doing. And we may go backwards before we go forwards. We may regress, but eventually we'll get there, because if there's anything that's persistent, it's evolution. Evolution is always going to move in the direction of lower entropy sooner or later, because that works. That's bigger. That's better. That's, does more for everybody. So yeah, it's the thing, and it's inevitable that we will all eventually grow up. But growing up is a slow thing to do, because it can't be done intellectually. It can only be done in changing yourself. And you can only change yourself. You can't change anybody else. So now everybody has to grow up on their own. But the good news is we all come here with a certain amount of intuitive sense that we need to do that we need to somehow make things better. We need to become more than what we started with. And that's given to us. That's part of our nudge to do that. And that's why all of you are here, because you've all been bitten by that bug and you all want to do more and grow up and whatever. And that's part of us. So that's an innate part of our consciousness, is that we feel that and we work toward it. And it is the main thing that is the reason for everything else existing. The only reason this physical reality exists is to give us an entropy reduction trainer for individuated units of consciousness to play in. And we play here by making choices, and by those choices, we grow up, we evolve, or we de-evolve. So evolution's the key idea. Yes. I'm sorry, I don't have any short answers, do I?
No, I know. My curiosity is there an opportunity for spiritual evolution after this physical life?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And the reason for that is that this is learning, this is growing, right? It's becoming. Now, when you grow up, like I say, nobody can help you do that. It's something you have to do on your own. And basically, it's a slow process. You learn to be different. Well, learning has to be cumulative. You have to learn to count before you learn to add, before you learn to subtract, before you learn to do algebra, before you can do calculus. It's cumulative. You can't just say, I'm going to skip all that stuff. I'm just going to start with calculus. I can't count, but I want to get in a calculus course because that's more advanced. It doesn't work. Learning has to be cumulative. You can't get to square B until you've been to square A. That's just the way it is. So to learn this growing up, it's not a one-shot thing. It's not like, okay, you can't count, but you've got, the next 10 years to learn math, or the next 3 years to learn math, and that's it. You're done then. You can't learn any more math other than that. Well, that doesn't make sense. You learn, you grow, you become. And if you think of yourself as a part of this larger consciousness system, you're evolving. Evolution means iterative process. You work at something, you work a little more. You get a little better and you work a little more. Evolution's iterative. So yes, you grow up past this. It's not if it were a one-shot thing, we wouldn't get very far. You see, it's like you'd start over. That, or just somebody else would have to start and get that. I mean, how much math can somebody learn, say, in 5 years? Well, not all the math there is to learn. It's just can't do that. So you have to iterate on it, and that's the way it is with growing up. Is much harder than doing math. It's a lot more difficult thing to do. So you have to go through this lifetime, and our avatars have a finite lifetime. They only go so far, and the reason for that is it's not efficient at this time for them to go any further. Because what happens, we get so full of fears and beliefs and things, been there, done that, know that, and we think we know a lot more than we do. We paint ourselves into a corner, and then new ideas, we pass them by. We don't think about them anymore. We're trapped in our beliefs and in our fears and in our ego have trapped us, and the evolution slows down. So what you want to do is let that avatar go log on to another avatar, and then start the learning process from where you left off. Not over, but from where you left off. And then you learn some more. And when that experience kind of gets dead-ended in your fear and in your ego, then you let that one go, start over. Each time starting over as much as you've earned in lower entropy up to that point. You come in with a certain intuitive sense of reality and what's important and what's not. And from that, you have experiences where you get to kind of reapply that knowledge, that quality of your consciousness. And yes, it has to be iterative. Otherwise, you could never get there. Think of our evolution of our planet. If it had 1 million years to evolve and then had to stop because that's all the time there was. You see, evolution doesn't work that way. Evolution's open-ended. There's no end to evolution. Evolution just runs and runs and runs, and as long as there is some place to go, as long as there are possible changes, then evolution keeps cranking on it. That's why I say it's for certain we will get to that kinder, gentler place one day, because evolution will just keep cranking on that until it gets there. And that can't be done in a one-shot thing. Evolution is not a one-shot thing. It's not a one-shot principle. It's a principle of repetition, building. And then once you build, now you're in a different state. And from there, you have different possibilities of where you can go next. And then you go someplace next, and now you have different possibilities of where you can go next, you see. The possibilities keep expanding. You're different now that you've evolved. So you wouldn't want to be stuck with any limitation at the ground level. That just is not a system. That's a system that would go so far and quit, and then it would be dead-ended. It'd be a dead system. Well, consciousness, is not like that. Consciousness just keeps chugging on.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you. And Christian, what was your question?
Yes. All right. Hello, Tom.
Hello.
Well, it's I've read your books. I've watched most of the videos on YouTube, I think, over time. So I'm I don't know, big fan, or what you could call it. I don't know. Anyways, there has been many questions surrounding your theory that has been coming up since embarking on this path. And one thing that I'm kind of feeling that I'm getting some sense of right now, but I'm still wondering is you talk about growing up, you talk about reducing the entropy of your consciousness, but they're not clearly, I don't feel that you clearly define what it actually is about. Like becoming love in such terms, I feel to me is quite vague. So I don't know if you could, and these type of feelings comes from an understanding that some people seems like they can get to a quite advanced level of, spiritual development, but still not really care, still not really embark on a path of, helping out or getting others to a certain type of level, and so on. So I guess this is not only a matter, growing up is not only a matter of, experiencing your nature as consciousness, as deep as possible, but maybe something more about like interpersonal relationship development, or I don't know.
Okay, I heard about 5 or 6 questions in there.
Yeah,
and,
it's just
I'll see if I can pick through them.
Yeah.
First of all, it's difficult, if not impossible, to be too specific about how an individual might interpret the words of get rid of your fear, get rid of your ego, get rid of your beliefs. Easy things to say, but very hard to do. And the question will come back as well, okay, what should I do, me, individually? How do I interpret this? How do I work with it? How do I use it? And that has to be individual. It's not a one-size-fits-all. There's no answer that would pertain to everyone. You have to be on your own path. And the best I can say about that is one foot in front of the other without a destination necessarily clearly in mind. You're really trying to modify yourself, change yourself, move from being self-focused to other-focused. And you can do this in 1,000 different ways, and each person would find, his own unique way in how to process that sort of thing. So there is difficulty for the individual to decide, well, okay, what do I do now? And the reason that's difficult is, one, it's not a matter of doing, it's a matter of being. And when they ask, well, how should I be? That's something that seems to defy anybody's ability to do, because you don't change your being by doing. All right, it's a problem of growing up. In my books, I use the phrase, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, which was kind of a joke phrase that physicists made up, because of course that's impossible to lift yourself off the ground by tugging on your own bootstraps. But it's a word that's become familiar, say, to athletes. You build up skill and perseverance and heart lung capacity and all those things, not by knowledge and not all at once, but just by working at it, and change comes as you work at it. So I think the first ingredient is a will, is a desire to grow up, a desire to get rid of fear, a desire to let go of all the negative things that you have in your reality. And see, these negative things give you also a way of practically approaching the problem. If whenever you feel something negative, and it can be mild things like stress, anxiety, it doesn't have to be fear, but it could be anger, annoyance, dissatisfaction. When you feel these things, that's your ego talking. It's your ego and ego being a product of fear, that creates all those negative things in your life. So those things, negative emotions, are easy to feel. Upset. Most of us feel negative emotions multiple times in any given day. That's just kind of typical human walking around, has lots of opportunities to feel negative emotions. Well, every one of those is attached to a fear. It's hard to find the fears. They're pretty invisible. It's hard to find the beliefs. They're even more invisible. But negative feelings are easy to find. Trace them back to a fear, then work on letting go of that fear. And the way you do that is, first, you have to accept that is a fear. You have to understand how that fear has informed all your choices. And then you have to have the courage to change, to not have that fear. And that's just where you pull yourself up with the bootstraps. That's where you just have to work at it and work at it. And it doesn't seem to work at first, when maybe then it works just a little bit, but not as much as you like, but you keep working at it, and eventually you conquer it. And that fear's gone, and you feel lighter, you feel broader, you have more choices, your reality gets a little bigger. that's kind of the process that it's applied to an individual. So I thought the first part of your question was kind of being loose in a bunch of intellectual metaphors and not really knowing what to do with all of that to change your life. Well, it's not the doing or the understanding any of it that's important. No, it's not. And you don't have to ever go out of body or change to any other reality frame or do any of those things to do that. It's just a matter of finding your fears and getting rid of it. It's just that easy and that hard. Another thing that's easy to say, but hard to do. But consistency, you will succeed, because this system is biased towards your success. Things will happen to you that will help you succeed if you really are sincere about doing it and just work on it without any idea of, I'm going to do this in 6 weeks or I'm going to do this in 6 years. Doesn't matter. Let the end point go. Just work on it. Pick one not so tough fear to work on to begin with. Try to work on them all. You'll just end up being totally overwhelmed. Just pick one. Trace a bunch of them back from negative feelings. Find the fear and find one that you think is probably in your reach and just work on that one, because the hardest one that you will ever get rid of is your first one, whatever it is. After that, the next one's easier. And after that, the next one's easier. And they keep getting easier as you go. So that's kind of the practical application of, evolution of consciousness. When it gets down to an individual, how do you affect your life with it? That's how. And nobody can do it for you. Nobody can help you much other than the larger consciousness system. And that system will give you as much help as you can use, because as you succeed, it succeeds. You lower your entropy, its entropy just went down a little because you're a part of it. So it will help you do it if you're sincere. If you're not sincere, then it lets you stew in your own juice until you become sincere. So that's maybe the first part of your question. You don't have to get into a particular kind of state. It's not about, if you think of the end state as a goal, then there doesn't seem to be any way to get there. The end state as a goal is then very confusing. Let that end state go. Don't worry about enlightenment or anything else. Just think, I want to get rid of my fear. I want to get rid of my ego. Or don't even think I want to get rid of it. Just say, I want to reduce it a little bit. Just a little bit. I'd like to reduce it. And work on that persistently. And indeed, you'll see progress. And then the more progress you have, the more everything else will make sense. Things start to fall into place. And what you need to do next will become obvious rather than being cloudy. So it's a matter of, don't think about it. Don't try to figure it out. Do it. Because if you try to figure it out and try to think about it until you have the whole process thought out and the goal and how you're going to get there, you can't start till you get all that done. Then you'll never start. You'll spend all of your time thinking about it, but never growing any. So it's not an intellectual process. So I don't know whether that helped or not, but yeah, it's not the stuff. It's not the well, I want to live in 3 realities and I want to do this and I want to have that big picture and I want to, get data and I want to go out of body whenever I want. And that's not it. That's just things that are available to you as you decrease your entropy. They're not goals for you to get. It's just stuff that falls into your lap as it's useful to you and doesn't fall into your lap if it's not useful to you. But to grow up, you never have to do anything that's amazing other than just get rid of your fear. And that's amazing enough.
Yeah, sure. I get all this and this is really good. But I'm just also a bit curious about, because right now it seems like we're heading in a direction where technology is getting more and more, all powerful, whatever. And it seems like we are soon going to be able to, invent technology that can alter the brain, or I don't know, the simulation of the brain, as your model would describe it, perhaps. then what would that be considered to grow up? You know, again, I'm asking about what do you mean by grow up? You know, if you would
Well,
like,
by grow up, I just mean lower your entropy of your consciousness.
yeah,
That's
but
growing
how
up.
do you think that would work with technology?
Sure.
Yeah.
The technology is not going to do much. You see, you have a virtual brain, and this virtual brain is just like your virtual body. It's a bunch of ones and zeros on a hard drive someplace. It's a virtual brain. The virtual brain sets the constraints on what consciousness can do. Okay, so somebody comes up and hits you on the head with a baseball bat and gives you brain damage. What that does is, according to the rule set of this virtual reality, now there's new constraints. So now maybe you slur your words, you know, you drag a foot, you can't write very well with your right hand anymore, that sort of thing happens. It just set new constraints on what the conscious can do with that avatar. So the brain isn't key to consciousness. Consciousness has nothing to do with the brain. The brain just sets constraints on consciousness. That's all. And your body's like that. Your body sets constraints on what consciousness can do. If the consciousness says, you know, run faster than a speeding bullet, you know, jump higher than a tall building, you know, whatever, well, the body can't do that. The conscious can make that input to the computer all the time, but it won't happen because the rule set says that the body's not going to be able to do that. It's not going to jump 20 feet in the air. So it's limited, you see, and that's what the body does. Your avatar is just limitations. It's a set of limitations set on the consciousness player. So it doesn't matter what they do with the brain. The brain doesn't affect consciousness at all. The consciousness player is still the same. So let's say you're playing the elf in World of Warcraft, and your elf, you know, falls off a cliff or something like that and does damage. Well, now the hit points are down, you know, the whatever they have, you know, how robust it is down. Now you have to play a crippled player. Didn't hurt you. You're the elf's consciousness, you see. But now you're stuck with an elf that can't play as well because he's injured. It works the same way with us. So it's not that the elf fell off a cliff and now you, the consciousness, the player, are somehow, you know, damaged. So the technology is really irrelevant. All we're doing with our technology is rearranging the constraints that the consciousness player has to play that avatar.
So then it sounds like it's not leading to genuine development of consciousness, but merely changing the constraints of the brain. So
yeah. So it doesn't matter. Yeah, technology. So it may, you know, it may loosen the constraints. Let's say it eliminates a constraint that we have now. Well, in that case, then the consciousness player could do more with it. That's like your elf suddenly getting another, 20 hit points because it got a spell or something that limited its constraints of how fast it could run, or some other kinds of things. So it's possible that they can do some things to the virtual brain that would remove constraints as well as add constraints. But still, it's just changing the constraints that the conscious has to work with. It's not going to change that consciousness evolution at all. It just gives it a different tool to work with, a different set of choices. But you see, you can grow up with any set of choices. If you've got the brain damage and you slur your words and drag a foot, you get different choices than you did before that happened. It's a whole set of different choices. If you're Steve Reeves and you get thrown off a horse or something and now you're paralyzed from the neck down, well, you used to be Superman, but now you've got a whole set of different choices, and you can learn and grow from any of those choices. And it's the same if you get a plus up, if you get constraints reduced. All right, now you can think 10 times as fast and your memory's 10 times better. Well, that gives you another set of choices. And the consciousness has to play those choices correctly for it to evolve, or it can play them badly and it will de-evolve with them. So you see, it doesn't change the consciousness game any, or the conscious evolution process. It just is modifying the constraints that consciousness have. So the technology is kind of irrelevant. It'll make the choices different, but still the consciousness has to grow up by playing the choices it's got. So let's say 100 years from now or 1,000 years from now, brain chemistry and other things give us more choices. well, fine. Conscious now has to play those more choices to where it evolves with them, or it may devolve with them. Suddenly being smarter and a better memory can be put to negative use as well as positive use. You see, it's still the choice of the consciousness to make good choices and evolve from it. So the technology and the big picture is irrelevant. Doesn't matter. Just changes the gameplay a little.
All right, thank you.
Okay, cool. And Philippe, you're up next. What was your question, please?
Yes, I have a question. You guys can hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Great. Yes. First thing, I want to say thank you for Tom. I listened to your books, and it was amazing. I really like it, and I also watch all the videos on YouTube, so I kind of have already some idea, and also the way you explain things. But it's really curious that this explanation that you're just giving right now, it just makes such a more sense in a sense, which is leads to my question. So my question is, it's really about fear, and so I know we have to go in our way in terms of like we have to experience and get input, like a feedback, and then do it over again and see what changed and see what it's the good results and the bad results out of that choice. But what I mean is like that is like I feel that is like a fundamental fear in most of my actions, for instance, right? And I really want to get rid of the fear, but how would it be like a more practical way? So like, for example, like with examples, or like, would you have examples to share of like how really to work on the specific fears? Because it just seems to be a really hard thing to do. You know, you work on the fears, and then you're like, okay, now I'm a lot better, but then they come again, and then you do the same mistakes over. And, you know, that kind of like that cycle, making the same mistakes, and it's like kind of miserable, you know?
Yeah, well, the main, let's see, the main problem that people have is that they try to find an intellectual solution to a being level problem, to a non-intellectual problem. So they think their way through it. They think their way through the fear, and they say, okay, my fear is this. I feel inadequate, and this feeling of inadequacy, changes the way I respond to everything. And they understand that fear and say, well, now I want to get rid of it. But what they want to do is change their behavior. You see, because they're intellectual and they're using their intellect to deal with it, they focus on changing their behavior, saying, all right, next time this comes up, instead of acting, upset because it makes me look foolish or something, which makes me upset because I have this fear of being inadequate and being foolish upsets me. Okay, instead of getting upset, they say, okay, I would just shut off that being upset, and I kind of stuff that under the rug, and I'm not going to go there, and I'm not going to feel that. I feel like I'm better now. And they do that to the point that even automatically they can stuff that stuff under the rug. But that's not growing up. You see, all that's doing is improving your behavior, makes you a better actor. Everybody around you appreciates it because now you're not getting hostile, you don't get upset, whatever. So everybody says, wow, you've really changed and you're a lot nicer to talk to, but you haven't grown up any. You see, all you've done is treat a symptom. You've not treated a problem. The problem is that fear, and that's the biggest mistake that people make, particularly people who are very intellectual, who live out of their heads, make when they try to reduce the fear. And it gets very frustrating because they work on that fear, but it's mostly intellectual. And then that fear pops right back up again because they really haven't gotten rid of the fear at all. They've just improved their behavior. See, so that's a trap that you can get into. To get rid of the fear, you actually have to get down to that level of fear, understand that fear, and have the courage to not express that fear. Not just to act differently, but to be differently. And the fact that you get upset, I still get upset, but I push it under the rug. I don't let anybody see it. That's not a big advantage. It's a small advantage in that you're making yourself more civilized, perhaps, but it's not a big advantage and you're getting rid of the fear unless you use that action, acting, to convert that into being. If you do that action, say, okay, I don't want to get upset here, and I don't want to feel that upset. Where does this feeling of upset come from? Why does this upset me? Well, it upsets me because it makes me look foolish, which upsets me. Well, I'm going to have the courage to accept foolish. If people, say, do things or whatever, and I look foolish because they do that, or they think I am, I have to just accept that. That's me. It's the way I am. I'm going to be authentic. And if foolish is authentic, then I'll have the courage to be that. You see, now you're owning it. Now you've named the fear, you're owning the fear, and now you've taken the courage to be authentic. At that point, when you live authentically, you start looking at your feedback. How is this working out? All right, now I'm authentic. Well, that's not working too well. Then deal with it, change it. Change yourself to where you react differently, not to where you act differently, to where you react differently. Okay, so maybe that's a problem where you're stuck, is that you need to get to the fear, you need to become authentic. And when I tell most people that they need to become authentic, they have no idea what that means. Who am I if I were authentic? You see, because we've lived with so much ego and fear and beliefs all through our lives, but we don't know who we are if we were authentic, any more than we know what our beliefs are and know what our fears are. So it's a long process. The second thing is, don't feel like if it's not working in a couple of months that you're just not doing it right. Work on it, be persistent. It's a lifetime's process. It's a work of a lifetime, not a work of a year or 2 years. You're still working on the same fear 5 years from now. That's okay. Just keep working on it, as long as you're really working on it and not just intellectually making it disappear because you don't look at it anymore. You stuff it someplace and you don't react. So if you keep working on it, you will succeed and you will get rid of it. But you have to be aware of the intellect getting in your way. And the intellect will make all sorts of excuses. It will justify anything that you feel and what it is you want to do. That's mostly its job, is to justify whatever your choices are. You have to be very skeptical of yourself, of that intellect, and try to dig down to what's authentic, what's really me, and then work at it from a deeper level, and work at it without necessarily a goal and a long time. Just work at it. It's when you let go of the goal and the need to succeed is when you begin to succeed. If you are focused on behavior, then it's harder to succeed. And behavior is usually what your goal is going to be. You want to behave differently. You want to feel differently. So you pick those things up as what you're working on, but then they suddenly become goals. And now your ego and your beliefs learn how to game the system to make it appear as though you've reached those goals. So you have to not let your intellect and your belief game the system. Always be skeptical of who's talking. Is that authentic? Who is authentic? Who am I if I were authentic? Would anybody like me if I were authentic? Would I like myself if I were authentic? That's that's things to wrestle with. But first steps to become authentic.
But if in the case being authentic actually makes you make more those mistakes that triggers the fear more, would not that be like a bad thing?
No, but see, now you can change it. Let's say you become authentic, and when you're really authentic, you're not a very nice person when you're authentic. All the fear and things, you're just a not very nice person at all. You've got all this nice cover up on the outside that makes you look pleasant. You've learned manners and all that, but authentic, you'll be quite a bear. Well, you can't change anything unless you own it. You see, that's the problem with working from your intellect. When you're working from your intellect, you don't own it. It's not you. You're not authentic, so you can't change it. All you can do is sweep it under a rug. When you become authentic, you own it. When you own it, you can change it. So if you get authentic and that makes you worse in your mind, now you can change it, because at least you're at a point where you're dealing with the real thing, not with the smoke and mirrors that the beliefs and the intellect and the ego give you. So you have a much better chance, but you have to have the courage to go there first. See, that's the problem most people have. But if I were authentic, I'd be, nobody liked me. I'd be a miserable, unhappy wretch of a person, and da-da-da-da-da. And they feel they need that image in order to maintain this place where they are in life and the relationships. And, they've made this life for themselves and how they fit into it. And letting that go is a scary, scary thing. That's why it takes courage to be who you are and to be authentic. But you can't change yourself until first you're authentic. See, when you're not authentic, then you don't have any traction on who you are. All you do is refocusing the mirrors and blowing more or less smoke, and you're making an image that suits you better, but you can't grow up until you first get authentic. And authentic, if that's an unhappy place to be, then you can change it from that level. That's the point where you are dealing directly with your fear, and it will take courage. But when you do it, you got traction now. You really are connected to the real problem, and you can make progress on it.
I really appreciate your answer, Tom, and I appreciate your work too. Okay.
You're welcome.
Okay, cool. So Ishta, what was your question?
Hi, Tom.
Hello.
That pretty much covered most of it, but there's another beautiful piece of it maybe we can talk about.
Okay.
I'd love to hear from your perspective the place for self-trust in all this. And I don't know how to say it. Maybe, there's this beautiful way that the Buddhists put it, the absolute truth and the relative truth, right? And I'd love to hear more about how you synthesize or hold those ideas, perhaps. And I can clarify if you need me to.
Okay, well, I can start with the self-trust and work on that a little bit, and then it'd probably be good for you to clarify a little bit of the absolute truth and the relative truth. I mean, I could talk about that too, but it's such a broad topic, I might end up talking about something that really wasn't what you wanted to talk about. So we may want to narrow that down a little. But as far as the self-trust, if you don't trust yourself, that's as good a sign as any that you're dealing, from fear. We have sayings, particularly, they're really popular these days. You hear them a lot in the New Age areas, but it's kind of a popular concept, is that you can't love anybody else until you love yourself. Okay. That is really poorly said. I understand what they're trying to say there, but that's really poorly said. You can't love anybody else, you see, as long as you are self-centered. You can't love anybody else as long as you think negative things about yourself. If you feel that you are inadequate, not nice, rude, not smart enough, not pretty enough, not rich enough, whatever, if you feel inadequate in ways, then it's hard to, focus your caring on others, because you're mostly focused on yourself about your inadequacies. So that's the idea, but it's not loving yourself. Love is about other. If it's not about other, it's not love. You don't love yourself. What that means, loving yourself, means stop being negative about yourself. But that's different than really loving yourself. So love is a thing that's always about other. Now, this negativity that you feel towards yourself, that has to do with your fear. That's you looking at your fear in the eyeball and not liking what you see. And so the fear and the ego and the beliefs are what leads you to not trust yourself or not like yourself or not be at ease with yourself. And those are also the things that cause you to not be authentic, because when you don't like yourself, then you start playing to an image that's what you do like. And that becomes your new persona, and that's how you define yourself. And as you get away from your authentic self, it gets harder and harder to change, to grow. Nothing seems to get traction. You work and work, but nothing happens, because you're not really working at the roots. You're working, with smoke and mirrors. So that's the idea about not trusting yourself. That's a fear. That's ego and belief. And that's something that you should work on getting rid of, letting go of. And that will just take a lot of time, like we said previously. You know, it's going to take a lot of time and effort and dedication to you to do that. But if you're sincere and keep at it and don't really worry about the end point and have the courage to be authentic, you will get there. And when you do, you will find a peace and a tranquility and a caring and a satisfaction in life that otherwise will elude you. So that's kind of that. Now let's go to the relative and the fundamental truth. And I'll put it in terms of truth. Things that are, you know, if we look at ethics, things that are good and things that are bad. Okay, things that are good are those things that lead toward lower entropy in yourself and in the larger system over a long term. Things that are bad are the things that lead to higher entropy in yourself and in the system over the long term. So now we have a kind of a scientific definition of good and bad. We have ethics now kind of pinned down. And it's the same with truth. If you have a truth that's your truth, you know, now we're talking relative truth. If you have something that you found to be true, remember, we have to always be skeptical as well as open-minded. Well, if that truth leads you toward a lower entropy consciousness, if it leads you toward enlightenment, if it leads you toward love and getting rid of your fear, then that's truth. Okay? It's leading you in the right direction. At least it's your truth now. If you find that things are not leading you in those directions, either leading you nowhere, they're leading you around in circles, they're not taking you anyplace, okay, then let that go. That's not truth. So now there's another way, using entropy, that you can say what's true and what's not true. And where that individual relative truth ends up in absolute truth is there are certain things, big things. We go into the big picture stuff, not whether you should do this or should do that, but get into the big picture stuff where there are things that reduce entropy and things that increase it. Like love is a reduced entropy thing, and fear is a high entropy thing, and those things are absolute. So you see, your absolute truth is just those things that reference love, caring. You know, that's low entropy stuff, and the things that move you toward high entropy stuff. So that then becomes absolute. So if you are dealing with your ego and with your fear, then that absolutely is not helpful. And maybe we shouldn't even bother about whether we call it truth or not. Maybe we just say, does it help you evolve the quality of your consciousness or does it not? If it does, do it and work on it until it stops and then find another way. So I don't know. Have I answered your question, or would you like to give me a little more guidance?
I think that's beautiful, and touches on a lot of stuff I was hoping you would. So I could.
Yeah, and the other thing about truth is that if it's not your experience, it's not your truth.
Okay.
If it's somebody else's experience and you read it in a book and you think that's what I need to do or that's what I need to be, now you are, you know, you either believe that or not believe that. And best thing to do is not believe it and not disbelieve it. Hold it up as a possibility and try to find more data and make it your own experience, because until it's your experience, you can't work with it. It's not something you can use until it's part of your experience.
Absolutely. I actually operate only on that one principle. I can't speak to anything that is outside of my experience. And when I state my opinion, I've been told it comes out as fact. And I've been really thinking about this because it's really interesting to me what, in fact, is the difference between opinion, fact, and truth. It's really beautiful conundrum I found myself in, and I'd love to hear your opinion.
Okay, well, we define those words. I'll give you a scientific perspective. We define those words, and we say that opinion is subjective, that truth is objective. In other words, opinion, a lot of people might see it differently. It's personal. It's subjective. It's the way you see it based on your experience. All experience is subjective. You can't share your experience with anyone. You can describe your experience, but you can't share it. Nobody else can experience your experience. Your experience is unique and it's only yours, and nobody else's experience will ever be exactly like yours. So it's entirely subjective, and that's where opinion comes from. It comes from your subjective experience, and all experience is subjective. So now what about, the objective? So what we say is a fact. Okay, so facts are objective. Facts are agreed to by lots of people. Everybody that comes into the room will see this pile of dirt in the middle of the floor. And all of them, upon examination, will say, that looks like a pile of dirt. So now that's an objective fact. And I can tell you how much it weighs, how much volume it takes, the chemical composition of it. All of these things then are measurable facts. So when we have a shared reality, this is a multiplayer game, so we share reality. Those things that are shared, that everybody agrees on, and that can be measured, because everything that's a fact is measurable. You see, so things like spirit aren't facts in science because you can't measure it. So therefore, it's something that is subjective, not objective. It's just the way science defines these words. So that's what facts are. And they are things that we all agree on that can be measured. So the last thing, what was it? We had subjective, objective,
and then we have truth.
Then we have truth. Now, truth is a thing that can be both. You can have objective truth and you can have subjective truth. Truth isn't only about facts. You see, that's one of the problems scientists get into. They think all truth has to be based on facts, and that's not the case. All truth doesn't have to be based on facts. Your truth is your experience. That defines your truth. Now, that experience of yours is colored by your beliefs, your fears, your ego colors that, but it's the only truth you've got if that's your experience. And you have to deal with that. But if you're always skeptical, then you deal with it better than if you're not skeptical and those experiences get you into being a believer of something. Okay, so the truth is what, how can we define that? So there are things that are most things are relative in the individual truth, and they tend to be opinions. When a whole bunch of people get together and they all agree, then they call it a fact, but that's not the case. It's just a bunch of people that agree. Facts need to be measured, and not just agreed on, but also measured. So truth in the big picture is something that will lead you toward a higher quality of consciousness, a lower entropy. That is truth. And what leads you in the opposite direction is not. Now, we won't call that, I probably shouldn't call that truth and falsehood. Rather, I would call that, what works and what doesn't, what's useful and what's not. And that's a more interesting and more valuable question. What works? What helps you grow up? That's what you move toward. Whether the debaters decide that that's truth or not is irrelevant, you see. So we kind of get wrapped around the axle with the truth word. Truth tends to be out of your own experience because you have no other choice. If it's somebody else's experience, it's not your truth. It's only you either believe it or don't believe it. That's not helpful to your growth. So if your growth is the primary thing, if lowering your entropy and becoming love is the primary thing in your life, then what's useful and what's not is a much more significant concept than whatever it is we call truth.
That's so cool. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Okay, so we've got Kelly, and then after Kelly is Sebastian. And again, if anybody has any questions that they have, they can raise their hands and they'll be answered in order. So Kelly, go ahead.
Hi, Tom. This is so fascinating to me. I've always seen the evolutionary impulse as what is driving me on the spiritual path. It's not a choice that I have. it's more like breathing and part of life. But something you said, I have so many questions, but really, what really kind
That's the way it works. You know, every time I give an answer, it creates, you know, at least 10 more questions. So this we could go on probably all the rest of the night. But yeah, go ahead. Sorry to interrupt.
No, that would be fine with me. I'm delighted. Something you said about consciousness evolving into something bigger with even less empathy, consciousness as a whole, maybe merging, really stirs my imagination as, say, it pertains to, say, this group, for instance, a group of people that are, I mean, I can just see that those in this group that are more grown up, to use your phraseology, are able, just by proximity, just by being grown up, to help those of us who are still teenagers. And as a whole, though, I just wonder if you have any ideas or suggestions about what a group can contribute to this larger awakening, so to speak, or is that something that evolves organically? Is it kind of a conflict to add an intention to the group meeting?
Yeah, the group is a powerful thing. There is such a thing as group consciousness. Okay. Let's see, Carl, what is it? C.G. Jung, right? Carl Gustav Jung. He talked about group consciousness in terms of, what was his word?
Archetypes, collective unconscious.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Yeah, he talks about archetypes. I don't know why that just jumped out of my head, but you know, that's the way it is sometimes. The word you want just drops out. But anyway, he talked in terms of archetypes. But what archetypes is a group consciousness. Every group that you associate with, you lend some part to that group consciousness. Culture is a group consciousness. A mob is a group consciousness. You know about mob culture or mob consciousness. Individuals in the mob wouldn't generally alone do the kind of terrible things that they will do as a mob. That's because they kind of, what should I say, excite or drum up each other's fear. It's a mutual thing, and the mob is a lot worse behaved than the individuals. Well, that works in the opposite sense too. If you have a bunch of people who are very grown up and low entropy people, they help pull up the group that they're a part of. It's like a group is like a vector sum of all the consciousness that feel that they're in the group. Now you can have a group that could be racial, it could be political, it could be national. There's lots of groups, and all of those groups affect each other because consciousness has the attribute of, let's just say, communicating with each other. We communicate consciousness to consciousness. We're all netted. All consciousness is netted together. So when you're in a group and you and your intent see yourself as a member of that group, then that intent of yours that claims membership in this group, whether they've passed you a certificate or you've paid the money or not, doesn't matter. If you just consciously feel like you're a part of that group, then you are affected. You kind of open your receive port, if you will, to that consciousness of that group that you're a member. See, we can shut out these comlinks from other consciousness with our intent, or we can open them up. We open them up to friends, to family, and to groups that we belong to. And it's a sum of all of that. So yes, the group has a lot to do with it. So let's say just with the humans going to grow up and become love. Well, if you had a subset of humans, say even 10 or 20% that achieved that, that would help the other 90% start moving in that direction. Yes, the group effect is a very powerful effect. You don't need to convince everybody to lean to the right. If the group leans to the right, then you just do that kind of automatically if you're a member of that group, because you're in a a communication with all those others. Also, this group consciousness, sometimes they talk about the 100th monkey. That's a group consciousness phenomena. Lots of things are that. So that's why when you grow up personally, when you become a lower entropy being, when you become more love, then the people around you will just start to grow up more. What you've done is provide them an environment in which they can grow themselves up. You've given them an environment of security, see, because if you're grown up, then it's about them. You offer them unconditional love. It's the only kind of love there is. Conditional love isn't love. It's something else. So you offer them unconditional love, and they feel that safety that comes with unconditional love, which lets them grow themselves up. They can take risks to find their authentic person when they have that unconditional love. So by you growing up, it helps those around you have an easier time to grow up too. Now, that doesn't mean they will have to grow up. You're not forcing them. You're just giving them an environment that makes it easier for them. You encourage them that way. So as people grow up, we help other people grow up. And as they grow up, then we help other people grow up. So the greatest thing that you can do to save the world is to grow up yourself. That's the biggest contribution that you can make to changing this world, is just to grow up yourself. That'll do more than anything else. Going out and replacing this president and getting rid of that, money system and doing all these other things, all you're doing there is working on symptoms. All those things exist because they accurately reflect the group's consciousness. And until that group's consciousness change, you can rearrange the furniture on the deck chairs on the Titanic, but you're not really going to accomplish anything major. All you're doing is making the symptoms less horrific, which is nice, again, civilizing, but it doesn't really help change anything. Eventually, all those symptoms will just reassert themselves. Get rid of one dictator, and eventually another one will take his place if the population hasn't changed. So that's, the group is a very powerful process.
Okay, thank you. You did answer it.
Well, go ahead. Ask me again. I don't want to. I don't want to give you the
phrase it. I guess I just have this vision. It just keeps coming to me of a group. I don't know. There's a group consciousness, like you said. Does this group consciousness, as it grows up, then join with another grown-up consciousness or another grown-up group?
Yeah, right. That can happen too, as well. Sure, two grown-up groups can get together and be a larger grown-up group that's even more grown-up than they were before. Yes, it does.
It affects things more than, or is it always on a sort of personal, individual participant level?
It's always on a personal level. All growth is personal. You have to make the choice to do things to grow up. It's just easier for you to make those choices toward good choices, let's say, toward growing up, if you're in a safe place, if you're surrounded by caring people, you see. So all choices are personal. It's an individuated unit of consciousness with free will. Everybody can make a good choice or a bad choice or an in-between choice. That's personal. But we can be in environments that tend to encourage us to make bad choices, and environments that tend to make us make good choices. So when you're in a mob, you're in an environment that tends to make you make poor choices. You see, if you're in a group like this one that I'm talking to tonight, well, now you're encouraged to make better choices, because growing up is a thing in this group. That's what you're here for. You're here to learn and to grow up and to become enlightened and become love and so on. And when you're in that kind of group with people thinking those kinds of thoughts, it's a lot easier to grow up in that group than it would be out by yourself someplace, you see. So it's all individual, though. The group isn't going to push you or force you. You have to make the choices. It just changes your environment to where those choices are harder or easier.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's Beautiful.
But we all grow up, just like the single cells became the multi-cells, became the differentiated cells, and now the humans have to get together. Well, when the humans all get together and make one thing, there may be another virtual reality someplace that will be big enough for several groups of humans. You may take this physical universe and some other physical universe and put them together someplace if they're doing really well, if it adds up to a better situation. Sure, there's no limit as to where that can go. That's the point. If these better environments are good to try to create. That helps us all grow up.
Start over with SpaceX on Mars, huh?
Right. Sure.
Okay. And next up we have Christian. Oh, wait, no, sorry, I'm wrong about that. I'm wrong, my mistake. Sebastian, rather.
Oh, yes. Hello, Tom.
Hello.
I'm a fan of your work too, as Christian and Philippe. And I must say, especially your Calgary videos has been a very transformative experience for me, especially with the remote viewing example you have in that video. And maybe I would start off with the question regarding that, because I was wondering, you speak a lot about intent, and I was wondering what would be the best or most efficient way to train your intent, and how do you know if it works? Like, how do you know if you make progress with it?
Your intent is like your motivation, if you will. It's the reason why you do things. You have an intent, and then action in the physical world follows the intent in consciousness. So one of the ways, I guess the most basic way of trying to learn how to have a focused intent is to learn meditation. Intent is natural to consciousness, but so is noise. Lots of noise. That's its thoughts, stuff that's basically not useful. What am I going to do next? What question am I going to ask next? What's this going to do? Did I brush my teeth this morning? Do I have to go buy things at the grocery store before I go home? And we got all this stuff running in our heads all the time. And you cannot have a strong, focused intent unless you can quiet all that down to where you don't. You have just all of your mental energy, all of your conscious focused on just one thing. That's a focused intent. Okay, so meditation is the best tool to help you focus your intent that way. But now there's another thing that most people just don't get or don't know about, and that is if you have a strong, focused intent, it has, to move things, to change things, if the focus is you're trying to accomplish something, you're trying to remote view, or you're trying to heal, or you're trying to do something else. The intent has to come from the being level, not the intellectual level. If it comes from the intellectual level, it's a weak intent. We call it, if it's only at the intellectual level, we don't call it intent, we call it a wish. Oh, I wish this would happen, or I wish that would happen. It carries no force. Well, very little force. It does carry a little force, but not much. It's a very weak intent. If it comes from the being level, then it carries force. And a lot of people, particularly people who are left-brained and very much live out of their intellect, they have a hard time with that because they don't know they don't know how to access that being level. Everything is from their intellect. If they don't think it out of their intellect, then it doesn't exist. They can't think it at all. But it's a little confusing, and I'll try to make that less confusing. Your emotions come right out of your being level. Okay, you don't think, oh, I should get angry now. Oh, I should feel happy now. See, that's an intellect. Obviously, people don't do that. When you feel angry, you just feel it. Feel happy, you just feel it. You don't think about it. Those things don't come through your intellectual space. They come out of your being level. So emotions are out of your being level. When you have a dream, a night dream, not a lucid dream, but just a regular dream. All of your choices in that dream are out of your being level. Your intellect's not engaged. It's you at the being level making all those choices in your dream. If you do make choices out of your intellect in a dream, that's called lucid dreaming. That's different than dreaming. Dreaming is very valuable for just that reason, because all your choices reflect the real you, the authentic you. They're all made out of the being level. The being level is who you are at your core. The core of your being, that's who you are. The intellectual level is who you'd like to be, who you think you are, what your image is, how you like others to see you. It's all of that. Now, the cognitive function can exist at the being level. The being level can think. So now it's starting to get a little confusing. The difference is, let me define kind of ego here. Ego is awareness in the service of fear. Okay, that's ego. Awareness in the service of fear. Now, if you don't have that fear, and you don't have that ego, and you don't have those beliefs, you still have awareness. And that awareness now exists only at the being level. So as you get rid of your fear, your awareness tends to be at the being level. That's why people who have low entropy tend to be a little more powerful with their intents, because they're living more of their life out of their being level and less of their life out of their intellect. So those are the two things. You have to get rid of the noise. Meditation is usually the tool for that. Just practice until you can hold an empty, thoughtless mind for as long as you like to, and then bring up a very specific thought and hold that for as long as you'd like to. And then stack a whole bunch of specific thoughts, intense, one on the other. And then you have to let the intellect go and work out of the being level. That's why so many people struggle with, say, out-of-body experience, because they want to run the experience out of their intellect. And those sorts of things, and using your mind to heal, that works so much better if it's out of your being level, not out of your intellect. Again, an intellect is like a wish with a little power. So being level intents are what you want. Now, when let's say you're healing, what would that being level intent feel like? Well, what it would feel like is that you have real empathy with that person you're trying to heal. It's not just an intellectual thing. Oh, I'm going to do this thing and say and think these thoughts and they'll heal. But you really care about that person. You really want to help them heal. That's important to you. You see, that then connects you with them at the being level. It's a caring about them. And then it's not so intellectual. So if you really care about the people that you're working on trying to heal with your mind, you'll do a lot better than if you're just trying to work a process out of your intellect. So I think those two things will probably help you kind of get over the issue of an intent that is strong and focused. Yeah. And a strong, focused intent modifies future probability. That's what it does. It changes the probability of what's going to happen next. So those are the two keys. An interesting aside, and I don't know, maybe I shouldn't take up the time. I'll try to do this quickly. It was kind of a way that demonstrates this being level intent versus the intellectual intent. When at Pear Labs, they were doing studies where they'd have random number generators generate random numbers, and people would try to use their intents to bias the average of those random numbers to be a little higher than what the average should be, or be a little lower. You see, because naturally, if you put up 100 random numbers between 0 and 1, then the average value ought to be 0.5. But it's not really, because you only have 100 of them, and it's going to be 0.49 or 0.51 or something like that. So there's a little uncertainty, and they were using intent to bias that uncertainty to the positive side or the lower side. So this was just experiments. They found people could do this and could modify these probability distributions within the limits of that uncertainty. So anyway, they had a bunch of people doing it, and they found something very odd. When the men worked on these particular experiments, they almost always biased the average to the way they were asked to bias the average. If they were saying, make the average a little higher, they generally made it a little higher. If they said, make it lower, they generally make it a little lower, but only moved it a tiny little bit, not very much. When the women were asked to do the same tasks, whether they moved it, if they were asked to do it higher, it was about a 50-50, whether they did it higher or lower. They didn't necessarily able to do what they were asked to do, but what they did do was a much greater effect. They'd move those random numbers 10 times as much as the men would, even though they were erratic in the way that they moved them. And that was a big question that they had at Pear Labs, like, why is this? Well, there's an obvious answer. The women tend to live more out of their being level. The only thing they do out of their intellectual level is relationships. They do relationships out of their intellectual level. The outside world, like trying to bias random numbers, they do more out of their being level. Men tend to live more out of their intellects when they're focused on the outside world, and men tend to function more intuitively out of their being level when it has to do with relationships. So it's just the way men and women are different, and that's why that happened, because the women, though they didn't necessarily bias it in the right direction, they biased it a lot more. The power of the being level was the difference, you see. So that's an important thing to try to work on, that you're not just trying to heal remote view, but you're doing this out of the being level. You have to use your cognitive function at the being level, which means you have to get all the fear and ego and beliefs out of your intellect. That's what makes your intellect different than your being level. It's that fear. Once you get rid of the fear, your intellect and your being level are all the same thing. They're all together now. It's just one thing. You don't any longer have a subconscious where you're aware of these things and not aware of other things. You're just one consciousness and you're aware of everything. You have all of that becomes part of your everyday world. So that's another thing that happens when you get rid of that fear. The intellect and the being level live together harmoniously as one being. Did that help?
Yes, this was a great answer. Thank you. But I have actually two other questions.
Okay.
And one thing that has been haunting me maybe my whole life probably is the female and male dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
Is it there? I was wondering, is it a purpose with this? Of this dynamic, and is it in other realities frames too, or is it just in our physical frame we have here?
Well, the way we have it here, sexuality as we have it in this physical reality is just part of the rule set here. Okay, the rule set evolved, our physical universe evolved. Now, you probably have heard that as the Big Bang. Well, the Big Bang is really the big digital bang. It's when the computer run button was hit on the simulation. And so it evolved, and it evolved the male and female because that's what worked. That was a combination that worked. That was most, let's see, what in our physical evolution, the criteria for success are survival and procreation. So that survival and procreation worked best in that rule set, under that rule set, with the evolution of male and female. In most other realities I've been to that are physical, in other words, they have a rule set that's tight enough, that has enough rules to it, that it makes action and response and consequence all very well defined, like this one. So we call that physical reality. And then there's other realities that aren't so physical, like dream realities. Dream reality is a looser rule set. And out-of-body reality has a looser rule set. Transition reality has looser rule sets. So they're not all like this. So if you go into an out-of-body, or let's say in a non-physical kind of reality frame, it's still a virtual reality, but there isn't male and female there in the same way there is here. It's a different sort of thing. It's sexuality and gender is entirely different in those loose rule sets because it didn't evolve under those loose rule sets. So it is very fundamental, though, to this reality. And the differences between them have evolved to become very useful for each other. The male and female connect in exceedingly positive ways, as long as those males and females are kind of in tune with their own instincts, if you will. Humans are an animal like any other animal that evolved here, and we have instincts. And our instincts are usually stronger around those things that are fundamental to our procreation and our survival. See, that's where our instincts are strong. Other things, not so important. You know, you don't have a lot of instinct in other things. But when it comes to survival and procreation, we have a lot of instincts. And if males and females work and think and be in consonance with their instincts, then generally they fit together perfectly, functionally and spiritually. They fit together very well, work together very well, and they optimize the sum of the whole. You know, they optimize the whole. Is bigger than the sum of the parts. But when we get crosswise with our instincts, then there's hell to pay. Then we have neuroses and problems, and things don't work out so well. So yes, there is a design, and it is very fundamental. And you're asking me about this book that I've been trying to write for the last 15 or 20 years. And I've got a little bit of it on my website, about 20 pages, kind of part of an initial piece of an outline. But I got to retire from what I'm doing now to have enough time to write the thing. I'm too busy. But I'm still gathering information, so it's good. You don't want to write things until you've got enough data. So I'm still collecting too. But anyway, yes, that one day I'll actually publish that thing, and then you'll have the whole enchilada there.
When you said, sorry to interrupt, your book, Tom, it's a book on gender, correct?
Yes, it's called Primal Male, Primal Female.
Okay.
Right, thank you.
All right.
You're welcome.
So I just want to be mindful of the time. I know, Tom, that you agreed to 2 hours, which is very generous. It's 8:48, so we're about 2 hours and almost 20 minutes in. How are you feeling right now?
I'm feeling fine. If we want to go for 3, that's fine with me.
Okay. So yeah, I guess we can go for a half hour, 40 minutes longer. So I actually had a question related to what we were getting into before about overcoming fears and overcoming, kind of these emotional reactions that we can have sometimes that might be related to fear and ego and deep set beliefs. So I'm a social worker, and so I see a lot of things through a psychological lens. And in terms of psychological triggers, that's a word that's become quite popular. If somebody does something and you have a response to it and you don't know why, we say you get triggered. You have this kind of emotional reaction inside, and you can subdue your response to that, but you still get triggered. And you still kind of have to do your meditation, or you have to breathe deeply, or you do your energy work, or whatever it is you do to kind of self-soothe. In your experience, did working with out-of-body reality or meditation states play a role in the resolving of those triggers for you? So specifically meditation, and if so, how? And specifically out-of-body, and if so, how? Because I know that you said that when you were working with Bob Monroe, that there were kind of tests that you would get from the larger consciousness system. I know you call them fear tests, whereby there would be like, you have a very vivid dream, and it's like a simulation that makes you confront very directly this type of fear that you have.
Mm-hmm. That's true. Yes. Triggers, for the most part, particularly from a psychological viewpoint of triggering behavior, it's a stimulus response, right? And you get the stimulus, and there goes the response. And people look at that very much like if you cross your legs and you put your knee up, and the doctor pops it with a hammer in just the right place, the leg jumps out, and that's a trigger. The trigger point. It's a response that follows a stimulus. And we sort of think of it like that somebody says this and just makes us angry. And usually these trigger responses are within families, within people that are very close to each other. It's not like, some guy that you never met before, it's not going to trigger you very likely. but not as much as the person you live with or your parents or your children or somebody else. That triggering has to do with your fear, your ego, and your beliefs. If you didn't have those, you wouldn't be triggered. You would still have responses, but your responses would be more responses of caring and compassion and how can I help responses rather than, oh no, grit your teeth or get upset. They would not be the same kind of responses that people talk about when they talk about triggers in psychology or in psychological things. So that's just the fear and ego. And we try to excuse them by making them outside of our control. Well, I can't help it. You hit a trigger of mine. See, so I get absolved from responsibility because, well, it's not really me. When you said that, that's just triggered me because, you see, I had this awful experience 10 years ago, and that left me with this sensitivity, and you said something that triggered that, so it made me angry, and I got really upset, I'm sorry sort of thing, but it wasn't me. Well, that's a cop-out on not taking responsibility for your own choices. All of our choices we have to be responsible for. If our response to a stimulus is anger, we need to take responsibility. We make the choice for anger. Okay, that experience we had 10 years ago makes it easier for us to choose that response, but it's still our choice and we can still change it. So the idea that the trigger emotionally is very similar to the trigger of the knee that flexes when it hits in the right place. That is a way to sidestep responsibility. It's the, I can't help it. It's my trigger. That's just the way I am. You have to learn to walk around my triggers and don't say certain things in certain ways because that will make me do something. Well, nobody can make you make a choice. All your choices are made by yourself. Your consciousness makes all of your choices. If other people trigger you, well, that's just you making bad choices. It was still your choice to make. Can't slough that off on, the devil made me do it. My trigger made me do it. That's a cop-out. So it's fear, it's ego, it's belief. And all of those things often turn into pain. And when somebody hits something that's painful, we tend to scream or holler or act out in some way. And if it's emotional pain, then those are probably the triggers you're mostly talking about. Is the emotional pain gets triggered. Well, that emotional pain is very strongly nested and rooted, in your fear and your ego and in your beliefs, and you need to work on getting rid of them. And when you do, then you don't trigger. You don't have those kinds of things. You don't have the your conscious awareness, and then this black area of your mind, the subconscious that is below your intellect, just kind of the cesspool down there where all that stuff that you can't control is. That's where your id, that's where your instincts are. All that stuff is down there, and that part you can't control, and that's not me. It's my subconscious. I want to pass. It's not my problem. I just have this subconscious and I have these triggers that live in there, and they just make me act that way. Now, you should outgrow them rather than expect other people to not touch them or walk around them. I mean, that's nice if they do. That gives you more of an environment that makes it easier for you to deal with them. That's what the unconditional love does. The unconditional love doesn't hit any triggers. It's just all about what can I do to make you happy? What can I do that helps you? You see, that doesn't trigger anybody. That's the struggles of ego and fear that set off triggers. So they don't really exist as fundamental things in our physiology or even in our psychology. They are the consequences of fear and ego and belief. So it's dysfunctional.
Okay, thank you. And in terms of your own experience, because a lot of people here in their process, we can kind of get into this low noise meditation state, right? or we can kind of feel the still point within ourselves and stay there for a while, and it's a nice regenerative place to be. And after a certain point, you can kind of operate from the still point maybe most of the time, at least to some degree. And as you evolve more and more, that comes more to the fore of your everyday experience.
That still point, by the way, that still point often occurs at the being level. That's one of the powers of meditation, is that when you're in that still point, you are more integrated. You know, your being level is kind of takes over, if you will. That's why in that state, it's often hard to think. You know, if you plan to do something, oh, I'm going to go out and remote do this and then do that, and you have all these plans. If you don't make those plans ahead of time and drill them into your mind, once you get there, you won't do any of it, because you're now operating out of a being level, not out of the intellect. And at the being level, you don't really care about those things. So yes, that's one of the powers of meditation, is it does tend to reach into your being level a lot more when you're at that sweet point that you're talking about.
Yeah. And so what a lot of people have discovered is that sometimes they still have triggers that are very deep, you know? So I was wondering, because you've said in another YouTube video that the void is just the beginning. Yeah, I think you said that when you were being interviewed by Rick Archer of Buddha at the Gas Pump. You said, you know, a lot of people will talk about going to the void and they think that the void is it, but the void is just the beginning, because there's this whole other larger reality to explore if you want to do that. And some people, there's, I guess you could call it part of their paradigm, or perhaps even a bias, that people will say things like, well, out-of-body experiences or exploring other dimensions or things like that, those are just relative experiences and they're not important because they're relative experiences. The argument is something like that. So, and that's not really a position I subscribe to, but my sense is that if they think that all that stuff is not important, are they missing out on opportunities to go really deep into their being level through having some of those types of multidimensional experiences? Does that question make sense?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Those experiences are valuable. We have experiences here in the physical universe, in our virtual physical reality. And there's a certain set of experiences you can have here. Just the set of experiences the rule set allows. Other things you can have here. Okay. Now, what we do here is make choices, and from those choices we evolve or de-evolve. So now we go into the dream reality. There's a different set of things you can do there. In the dream reality, you can fly, you can teleport, you know, things can come and go. There's all sorts of things you can do there that you can't do here. It's a looser rule set, but you're doing the same thing. You are making choices, but the set of choices now are very different because the rule set's different. You see, the set of choices are a very different kind of thing. You don't have to have a big lead up to a particular event where all the pieces have to be causally related. You don't need this big causality thing. You can suddenly be in a dream and there you are, in a boat, and there's a huge storm, and it's tipping over, and it's not like you needed all the causality to lead up to that like you do when you're in this reality. You're just in it instantly, you see. Well, things like that can't happen here. If whatever happens to you here, there's a long chain of causality that led up to it, and a long chain of causality that's the consequences of it. In the dream, you don't have all that chain on either side. So now you have a whole different set of choices that you can make. You can get into dramas there that wouldn't be wouldn't be good to get into here, you see. So it gives you another place to make choices. And by those choices, you can evolve or de-evolve. The out-of-body reality is exactly the same. It gives you another reality frame with another set of choices that aren't constrained by the physical. They're not even constrained by the dream reality. You now are making choices. You're aware, making, choices in that out-of-body reality. Things can happen, events take place, and you have the same deal. Your consciousness, you're making choices. And by the choices you make, you can grow, you can evolve, or you can de-evolve. You see? So all the choices you make in any reality frame offer you the same game. You have free will, you make the choice, you evolve or you de-evolve based on the quality of that choice. So is it good to be able to get in different realities with different choice sets? Absolutely. It gives you now another whole set of possibilities to choice, in choice making, instead of just the one that you're constrained to. So are these other realities useful? Yes, they're very useful because they give you another opportunity, different kinds of sets of opportunities. They're more useful for some people than the other. It's not, oh, it's just relative and doesn't matter. Well, you could say that about dreams or daydreams or night dreams, both. But that's foolish. You're throwing away opportunities to make choices, and choices you can't make anyplace else. There are things you'll do out of body that just won't occur to you and give you those choices anyplace else. It's a different level of choice making with a different set of constraints. And that's what makes it valuable. Now, the other question is, take it from the other side, is that necessary? Do you need all those choices in the out of body and in the dream and here? Well, no, you don't need them, but they are helpful if you have them, in the sense that it's just more choices to make, living in a bigger reality. But you don't have to have that in order to grow up, in order to become love, in order to lower your entropy. You can become enlightened, if you will, or be on a path at least to enlightenment. And you can do that if you never leave this reality. So it's not necessary to do these things, but it's extracurricular, if you like, and it's helpful in the sense that it gives you another set of choices. It's not necessary. And if people get too focused on it, oh, I really want to do out of body, I just really want to do out of body, and they get very focused on it, it can be a detriment. Now your ego is twisted around it. You've got a bunch of beliefs about it, and you want to do it so bad. That's all ego. You see, now that out of body has become a negative rather than a positive. So it has a lot to do with the attitude. And you can get negative here in this physical reality. Those people that are very negative about this reality, oh, this reality sucks. This is the worst place ever. I can't wait till I get out of here, and blah, blah, blah. Everything sucks. Everything's awful. Reality's awful. People are awful. Politics are awful. Everything's awful. And those people basically waste their time mostly because they're not making choices. They're not engaged making choices. They've dropped out and no longer want to play the game. And they sit around and basically wallow in self-pity and in their ego and in their beliefs. And they're wasting their time. So you can waste your time in any of those realities. You can waste time in a dream reality or in an out of body or here. So it's not that one reality is superior than the other. They're just different. All of those are equally real. The out of body and the dream are equally real to this physical reality. They're just different reality frames. Not one of them's not more or less real than the other. And they all give different choices and they all give different opportunities. But in any one of them, you could learn a lot. And in the physical one, you've got more feedback and you've got more consequences. So the things that you do create consequences that help you understand whether that was a good choice or a bad choice. In the out of body and in the dream, the consequences are very light because the rule set isn't that tight to compute consequences of everything you do. It's just experiences you're getting out there, experiences and choices without a whole lot of feedback. You have to provide your own feedback when you look at those experiences and what you did with them and what you learned from them.
Thank you. Yeah. So we've got two folks that have got questions. We've got Ishta, and then we've got Rich, who I see here raising his hand. Okay. So Ishta is deferring to Rich, and I'm sorry, Rich. I just have to ask one more thing. I just want to ask one more thing. For folks that, and this is dovetailing off my first question, which is for folks here that for whom consciousness exploration out of body or in lucid dreams or otherwise is beginning to happen naturally as a result of their meditation experiences or lowering their entropy and so on, or for those who just wish to pursue it, what can they expect in terms of like fear tests and things like that? Because this is something that I know that you and Dennis and Bob had talked about as a common experience that you all went through.
Yeah, you will most certainly get fear tests. The reason that that the system will give you a fear test is that in these reality frames that have looser rule sets, what you think, what you intend, what you feel, your fears will be manifested very quickly, very easily, and very dramatically. Here, that's not quite the case. Now, here, an intent does move future probability. And if your intents tend to be all negative and fearful, some awful's going to happen, some awful's going to happen, and that's the way you live, awful things do happen. And they happen a lot because you bias what's going to happen with that negative feeling. When you get to an out-of-body reality and you have this fear about, well, what if I go there and I can't get back? Or what if I go there and there's something horrible gets me? You know, do the things live out there and are they dangerous? And you've got all these fears. Then what you will find there is a manifestation of that fear. What you are manifests there. You often see a mirror image of what's inside of you when you're in those states, because very quickly your intent will modify future probability. So when you're in an out-of-body state and you have a lot of fear, you're likely to find monsters and evil things and, sinister looking people with red glowing eyes and all the rest of it, to make metaphors of danger, danger, danger. And those things will frighten you. And if you experience fear, then you will be more fearful next time, probably. And then it might get worse if you keep working on it and you can't let go of your fear. You eventually will quit altogether and either say, that's a lot of nonsense, or I can't do it. All of those are negatives to your long-term growth. You're basically now cutting out a set of experience you might have and setting it aside. I can't touch this because it's too frightening. It would be better not to have that frightening experience, grow up to the point that you could deal with it successfully, let go of a lot of that fear, and then do the out of body, because then you would be more prepared. So what the system does to help that is it will give you a fear test. And if you become very fearful and, your reaction to it is, let's say you go out of body and the first thing you do is a couple of thugs come over and start hitting you with sticks. And if you scream and run away, then you've failed the fear test. If you just stand there and say, what's up, guys? What are the sticks for? What's going on? And you interact with them and connect with them. And you can even just make them go away if you like. Your intent can change things there. So your intent's powerful there. It's so powerful that it'll create things that scare you, because that's the fear you have inside of you. So that's why you get the fear test. Better to not go and get feared than, better not go at all than to go and end up with a fearful experience, because that just adds another layer of fear in your system. That's not helpful. So the system doesn't want people there who are fearful. So they'll give them some kind of fear test just to chase them away until they grow up, but not so fearful that it frightens them deeply. Often it's a very benign fear test. Often you'll hear noises, you'll feel electric shocks, you'll feel like your body is flapping like a flag in the wind. You'll get all kinds of other things going on with you. And if that's okay with you and you just kind of ride it out, eventually that stuff just goes away. But if it's not okay with you and it frightens you, then you will, you'll stop, which is what you should do.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. Rich, go ahead. You're up.
Thank you. Tom, I've had experiences since 1986 when I was 44 of noticing quite a lot of dreams that would come true the next day within 24 hours, pretty ordinary events. Mm-hmm. And so I concluded from that the future interacts with the past. Is that what you discover in your explorations?
No, it's not that the future interacts with the past, but that there is a probable future. Okay, the future is not a done deal. We have free will, so we don't have determinism, and we have a future that is probabilistic. So the system calculates all those things that could possibly happen and the probability that they will happen. And it's got that. Now you can raise those probabilities to make something that's not so probable more probable, or something that's very probable less probable, with your intent. So your intent can move those probabilities around. So your intent will nudge it, but won't necessarily, you can't control it, but you can nudge it, you can influence it. So that's how that works. So you get a precognitive dream for a couple of reasons. One, you are just accessing data in that future probable database, and you're looking at the things that are likely to happen. And you think that, well, how could anybody compute, those things likely to happen? It's not that hard, because most of us are very habitual. Most of us live our lives like zombies. We just react to things in the same way. We have the same feelings about the same responses. We're very predictable if the database has a complete set of data of everything we've thought, everything we've felt, every decision we've ever made over multiple lifetimes. It has us pegged pretty well as far as trying to guess, what's going to happen next. And so it does with other people. So another
question related to this: is it possible in the after the death experience to reincarnate into a past historical event?
No, you can't go back. The past is done. You can't do that. Now the past is there as a database. This future database turns into a past database as time takes events from the future into the past. It's all there. You can go watch it, you can live it, you can get into it just like you're a part of the movie. You can ask questions, you can make changes, you can see how things work. You can go back and change decisions you made and see how that would work out. It's all there in probability, and you can visit that past database. It's a big database. It's not only what actually happened, but everything that could have happened and the possibility that it might have. And within your intent, you can navigate that database. But you can't go there with a incarnation, because it's history. It's just history in a book. It's data in a database. It doesn't have free will. Right. But other than that,
here, because we're running out of time. Have you read the Cess material by Jane Roberts since the 1970s?
Yes, I have read that.
He lays out explicitly that you can incarnate in the past, and that this is a universal process.
Yes, he does, and I think all kind of mediums. Jane was a very good medium. She was excellent, but mediums have to interpret what they get into their own experience base. And Jane muffed that one. That was one of the major, didn't have a lot of flaws in that work, but that was one that wasn't quite right. What Seth was saying was something to the effect that, the past and the future, all exist. It's all there. And it's all there at the same time, that sort of thing. And what he meant was that you have a future probable database, you have a past database. That information is all available to you at any time. So it looks like they all exist. She made the mistake of thinking that they were all separate, independent things that all happen in the same time. And that's just logically untenable. It doesn't work like that.
So you don't accept the idea that there are parallel streams of history. For instance, one in which there's World War III.
Oh, yes, there are. No, there are, but they're not. They're all in probability within that database. So you can go into that database and you can say something like, what would the United States be like in, the year 2000 if the US had lost World War II and Hitler had won? And sure enough, that's part of the probability database, and it'll run you right through that, and it'll show you a picture. You can ask it what you want to see in details. It's all there, and you can do that, but it's just probability. No, you don't have parallel universes where every possibility is worked out in a separate universe. That doesn't work practically. Every time something happens, every time I scratch my head with my right hand instead of my left hand, a whole universe has to be created to mirror that change. You see, it's not a practical thing. So the many worlds theory, I think, is is not a good theory because it fails Occam's razor. It's way too much information and data, and it doesn't accomplish anything different than you get with a virtual reality and databases.
Well, there aren't any limits on infinity.
Nothing that is infinite is real. You can't have anything that's infinite that's real. Infinity is it's something you can approach, but you can never get there. You see, there is no infinity. Infinity doesn't exist. There is no infinity. And any real system has to be finite. It can't be real, or it can't be infinite, because infinite systems require infinite bits and infinite energy and infinite whatever. And
Well,
that's too hard to supply.
Lays out that infinity can only create infinity. There's nothing real except infinity, and it allows every kind of lower level creation you want. There's no limit to its capabilities.
Yeah, I've heard things like that, but I don't find them logical. If you look at the logic, and where does that logic lead to, and what are the logical consequences of that, I have problems with them being logical.
Definitely transcend logic. That's correct.
Yes.
Absolutely correct. That's the nature of the beast.
So I have a perhaps clarifying point to add here. I've taught classes on consciousness development before, and some students will talk about infinite possibility that we have as individuated consciousness. And I said, well, what do you mean by infinite possibility? Because we have to have some constraints in order to evolve. And it's like saying, well, let's go play Nintendo. And then you say, well, what game? I don't know, just Nintendo. Well, yeah, but what game? Like, we have to, but if we're just talking about the system itself, we can't, let's say we're talking about the void absolute, right? Rich, like, could we roughly equate that with infinity? Rich?
Yes.
Could we roughly equate the void absolute with infinity?
Yes.
Okay. So it feels infinite because it's a 0 point, but we just don't know what it can be. And when it's in the manifest realm, that's when it has values, if you will. Tom, I don't know if you would agree with that.
Sure. Infinite is a good metaphor. We need that in math. We use it all the time in mathematics. The limit as such a variable approaches infinity, but you can't ever get there. And as long as it's an abstract concept, well, yes, you can have infinite, possibilities just because there's more possibilities than you can possibly enumerate. But in any real reality frame where things happen or don't happen, then you have limits. You can't have limitless. Infinity is a concept, not a reality. That's why I say any real system has to be finite. You can have imaginary systems that are infinite if you like, but they're not real systems. A real system can't be infinite, just for the reasons that you say. Our universe. Well, let me say another thing. People use infinity as a metaphor. If it's bigger than you can imagine, beyond your comprehension, we tend to call that infinity. But when it gets down to actually modeling things and understanding things, logically, now infinity is just a nice concept that lets you kind of look at limits, but it's not a real thing. So the problem is taking infinity that's perfectly good for conceptual work and making a physical thing like, our universe is infinite. Well, it isn't. Or that consciousness is infinite. The larger conscious system is infinite. It isn't, because it's a real system. It's not just an imaginary system. It's a real system. So that's the difference as I see it. But now I don't mind other people disagreeing with that at all. That's my way I look at it and the way I see the logic, and other people see it other ways. There's lots of physicists, I shouldn't say lots, there's a few physicists anyway, who think the many worlds is a great idea. And there you have basically infinite numbers of universes that split off for every change. Smart people can come to those conclusions. I just don't see the logic in it.
In our system of reality, that we all seem to be in recent years, experiments have decisively proved a retrocausal effect with human beings. And that's in the news this last few weeks ago.
Well, what do you mean by something that moves backward in time? That's usually what retrocausality means. Yeah. What do you mean by that?
And the experiment is based on the well-known experiments where you give a series of random photographs, and one photograph is really emotionally charged. And so after you see, without knowing ahead of time, all of a sudden there's this emotional photograph, and they're measuring your brain waves, you'll have a reaction in a brain a fifth of a second later in a certain level, certain location, very reliably. Then some parapsychologists reversed the experiment to studying the brain waves while random pictures were being shown. And they showed that people would have the same physiological reaction a fifth of a second before the appearance of a emotionally stimulating photograph when looking at random photographs. So that proves an effect that reaches at least a fifth of a second into the future.
No, well, no, it doesn't actually. If once you understand consciousness, that is all entirely causal and is understandable. What happens, and it's not even a fifth of a second. Sometimes they get up to 1 or 2 seconds, and they also the person has the reaction before the random number has even been drawn to select the picture. So the computer hasn't even started the process to make the random number to select the picture until after the person has already reacted to it in some way. Well, the reason that works that way is that in this virtual reality that we live in, there is a problem in all virtual realities called lag, video lag. And in video lag, some things are faster than others, okay? Reactions tend to be slowed down. Well, our avatars have to abide by the rule set. That means they're mechanical, they're electromechanical, biological devices. They're very, very slow compared to consciousness, compared to our awareness. So what happens is, in order to reduce the video lag and make this a more usable reality frame, the body has to start moving, has to get its tiny potentials that start with emotions and with muscle movements and other things have to be started ahead of time based on the probable reality of what's coming up. Well, it's easy for the system to know what that probable reality is going to be like. That's 100% for the system because it's a probable computer and a probable it's a virtual computer and a virtual random numbers, all of that. The system controls all of that. So it starts the human moving ahead of time. Now, if the human in free will changes his mind, well, then the system has to back off and do something else. So it's one of these games where, it's trying to work ahead. That's the way that you reduce video lag. And one of the ways that you can see that is that if you are uncertain about what you're doing or about what you're going, or if you have fear to where you change your mind a lot, you become clumsy and uncoordinated. In other words, give yourself a foot wide board to walk across, lay the board on the ground, and anybody can walk across it without falling off. Put the board 100 feet in the air, most people can't make it across it without falling off. That's because their system starts to do this, and the fear says, no, that's not right, and it starts something else, and they come very clumsy because the system can't make it a smooth motion. It can't do the video lag properly. It makes it a very clumsy actor. So that's what's going on there. It's not, you don't have to do retrocausality or get to affinity or anything else. It's not, people use that experiment to prove determinism, that the future's determined. It's not at all. We have free will. It's just part of the way the virtual reality has to work. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to fly airplanes or do anything else that requires fast reflexes. We'd be lost here if we didn't do that, just because our physical systems are so slow compared to our mental systems.
Well, I'm not convinced by your answer.
No, I wouldn't expect you to be. That was that's a pretty talky answer. You'd have to read a lot of the stuff behind it before you'd find it more interesting. And even then, you might not be convinced about it. It's all right. You know, everybody needs to work in their own way.
So when the Tibetans had prophecies hundreds of years ago that iron birds would be flying in the air and the Dharma would come to the West and stuff like that. So you would discount that prophecy?
No, I don't discount it.
Happened.
No, they just getting that data out of the database. There's probabilities of the way things will happen. Who knows?
Well, is it possible for the database to deliberately activate its information in the past? Is there can be a deliberate transmission from the present to the past to change the past?
No, you
Why
don't
not?
change.
If it's all a simulation, why can't the simulation run back in time? Why should it just be limited to choosing only the future? Why not change the past and switch the past?
There's no, in a simulation, you could take your records and modify them, but then they would no longer serve as records. Those records are there, you know, we learn from history. Those records are there for a purpose. The database has a function, and if you took your records and changed them, then you would be defeating the purpose of having the records in the first place. So it's not something that the system would do.
Wait, the Course in Miracles says that this is what happens. We forget the past and the past.
Hey, Rich, I'm just going to ask you not to talk over the speaker, please.
Yes, go ahead, Rich. I'm listening to you.
Okay. Well, I'm responding to time pressure, but I'm really keen.
Don't worry about the time pressure. I'll stay here as long as it takes for everybody to get their questions out. Okay. So let the time thing go.
States explicitly that the past does disappear when it's been forgiven.
Yeah.
Forgiveness
well, that does.
The past, and
that
the
does.
Events are gone.
That's true.
Remembered.
Yeah. What happens is once the past is no longer is no longer viable here. You know, once you have something that is no longer here as a fact because it's gone, because the data is just lost. You know, that's entropy happens, right? Data goes away. Now that makes it a new ball game. Things can come back differently. That's true. I would agree with that entirely. If that's the, quantum mechanics would agree with that too, as do some other experiments. They agree with that. It's about information. This is a virtual reality, and facts are created by data coming into the minds of consciousness, and that's what creates the facts. And when that doesn't exist anymore, then that's no longer part of the database as far as what you have to accommodate with new facts. You don't have to accommodate that anymore. It has no more impact on the future. Yes, the past does have an impact on the future in the sense that history requires it. You know, history happens, and because we have this causal string, this causal chain, because of the causal chain in the history, in the past, you have then a limited number of future events that can happen. You know, that's the way it works. So yes, there's a limitation, but that's just constraints. History doesn't cause the future, it puts constraints on the future. And when that data leaves the past, then the constraint leaves with it.
Well, I think what I imagined is that the out-of-body realms, which of course there's infinities of them, they're outside of our space-time entirely. And that means in this very moment, we're outside of the space-time frameworks, and we're like remote viewing and carrying out a simulation that seems to be in linear time in a well-behaved normal reality of cause and effect. But that's just an artificial simulation that we're running within a framework that's completely free of space and time.
Right. Well, it's not free of time, it's free of space. Time is fundamental, space is not.
Oh, I see. Time's not fundamental.
No, time is fundamental. Space is not fundamental. So that's, you have to have time. If you don't have time, you can't have evolution. Evolution is you have to have a past and you have what we were and now what we are. Change defines time. So if there's evolution, you have to have time. If there's choice, you have to have time. So time is fundamental, or nothing ever changes. Change defines time. So you can't have a reality where things change, like
So
a
there's only
dynamic
one.
reality. You can't
There's
have a
only,
causal chain if there's no
what if
time.
there's a causal chain perpendicular?
Perpendicular to,
Like a number of parallel histories at once, then causality would be perpendicular, as well as past to future probability would be like toward more color or less color,
yeah,
more pleasure or less pleasure. There would be other dimensions to time that would be fundamental,
yeah. Well,
more musical or less musical.
now we're back
Realities
to,
without any sound, realities with multiple dimensions of besides the ones that we know.
yeah. Well, there are lots of realities besides the ones we know, and I would agree with some of what you said, but we get back to the parallel universes sort of things, which I don't agree with. But yes, there are many virtual realities. There are many other realities, and we call each one a dimension into itself. Time is local. The reason this simulation has time is because, like all simulations, it's got an outer time loop. Things progress one delta t at a time, and some other simulation has a different time loop and a different resolution with different delta t's. All of that's different, but the system itself, consciousness, can exist without time, and time has to be, linear for it to be useful. Now, time, primordial time, before it got to be linear, was still time. Things changed, but they didn't change regularly or a way that you could make sequences out of them. So when you got regular time, that's a digit. A virtual system is digital, so it's a 0, 1, 0, 1. That becomes a metronome, something that goes back to 0 and 1, back and forth. That creates regular time. That regular time is required to create simulations, although all the simulations can be totally different clocks. Our clock is local, yes, but in our time, in our simulation, all the time has to run forward, and that's just the nature of time. You can't evolve, you can't have choices, you can't have any of that without time. And you can't have causal chains without time running forward. And the retrocausality only appears to be that way because we don't really understand what's going on. If you see it from a virtual reality viewpoint rather than a material viewpoint, all those retrocausal issues disappear. And that's true in quantum mechanics as well.
I have one clarifying point here, which is, so Tom, just to make sure we're not talking past each other in terms of concepts, let's say that there's the time that we experience here in this dimension or on planet Earth, in this physical universe. And then when you're in an out-of-body state, the psychological sense of time will change. And then let's say you're in a very expanded and subtle state of consciousness where you're just your individual consciousness in the void. Then time seems to stop, or there's almost a state of no time. Psychologically, there's a state of timelessness. Now, we could say, would you say then that even though it feels like there's no time relative to Earth time, there is still some level of evolution happening in your consciousness, and since evolution is change, there is some fundamental dimension of time happening there. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, exactly. I'm saying that when we get to the point where it seems like there's a state of no time, there is still time. What is gone is our awareness of time, because our awareness of time is tagged to change. And when you're in just the void, floating in that black void, nothing seems to change. So when nothing seems to change, then it seems like there's no time because we're not experiencing change. But that doesn't mean that the system that is creating that virtual reality doesn't have time. It has time. It's creating the virtual reality. Those little delta t's are still chugging along as always in that state or in your other states. It's just that you become unaware of them because you become unaware of change. Everything seems the same. Time tends to disappear if there's nothing changing in your environment.
Okay, thank you. And Rich, did that clarify the question that you were asking?
No, I think the discussion is at such a fundamental level that
I think
probably
so too.
We're all making huge mistakes.
Like I agree. I agree with that.
Babies trying to figure things out. when we're at the very beginning of the investigation, because obviously the future extends for billions of years of exponential evolution, mathematics doubling every 10 years, everything doubling forever and ever. There's no limit to it that I can see.
No limit that I can see either. It just goes on. That's the way evolution is, open-ended, keeps chugging, and as long as there's some place to chug to. But that doesn't make it infinite. It just makes it big.
If there's backward causality, then it can loop back in time, and there can be a physical universe that lasts for a billion years. It can last for infinity because the lifetimes can go back and keep reincarnating and recycling and evolving forever.
That's
within
true.
That universe. I think that's what's going on.
Yes, that's true, but you don't. That's true, but you don't need that for that same effect. And when it's a digital computed universe, then you can get the same result. You can take something, copy it, paste it, and start again. So let's say our universe gets hit by a meteorite that destroys the whole thing. Well, the system could easily just take it a year before that happened and start it over in a new simulation. You see, so digital things are very flexible. You can take things and talk about looping it in on itself. You can copy and paste and arrange things any way you want.
Well, I think it's a fractal infinity, like the Mandelbrot set.
Yeah, that's true. And theoretically, Mandelbrot set goes on forever, but practically you can't make one that's that big. So that's the difference between our theoretical and as a concept and as a real system. So a real Mandelbrot diagram can't have infinite numbers of things in it. There's no way to get infinite pixels in it, infinite things. But you can imagine it being infinite, yes.
What if it actually is infinite?
You can't make one. You can't build one, and you can't build it. Nothing real. So it wouldn't be real. It's only ideal.
Doesn't mean it's not real. That's proof that it's real.
Rich, sorry, I'm gonna have I'm gonna have to step in here and just say, I think that we could keep going on and this point.
I think so.
And I don't want to keep harping on a point that maybe it requires specialized knowledge that other folks might not have. I just want to keep the discussion focused to broader things that directly impact people's evolution in the moment.
I think Rich is right. I think the differences between us are so fundamental that they're not going to be resolved in a discussion at the logical consequence level. They really have to go back to basics, and that would take a lot of time and I'd have to familiarize myself with what he's thinking and where he is, and he'd have to that would just be a long process. I don't think it suits us in this meeting to do that. But Rich, it was good talking with you, and I'm glad you sticking up for your opinions and everything. That's super. And I think if we had enough time, we could probably come to some sort of at least an agreement to disagree, if nothing else.
The same out-of-body experience together and merge awareness, and then do that together. That's what I want to do.
I don't think I understood that. I didn't hear all of it. I want to
go into the same out-of-body experience with you consciously, and do it a lot, and merge our consciousness, doing this with a lot of other people, and then we create from that together.
Yeah, I've done that once, but
just once.
Yeah, just once. See, actually, I've done that twice with two different people, where I've gone with we did mutual out-of-body experiences together.
That's what we're doing right now. This is a mutual out-of-body experience. That's the secret. You're creating this from outside the body with infinite power, just as it is.
Well, okay. So we're coming to, it's 9:40 at this point. Does anybody have any closing questions or comments that they want to make before we wrap up?
Wow.
Wow. Yeah.
So did everybody get their chance to say something?
I really want to thank you, Tom, for your time. I know you're a very, very busy person, and I was working this whole time, but I was trying to listen. It was like a lot of pressure, trying to like simultaneously do two things, like work and here. But I really, really appreciate your work, and I really appreciate everything that that you've done for myself in terms of like the knowledge that you built up with this time, and I could, kind of understand and take more like to the being level in that sense. And I also want to thank you for the work, and I know that you put a lot of effort to really help a lot of people. I know it. So I'm really, really thankful for that. Okay?
Thank you. You're welcome.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Philippe. And anybody else?
Mariana, have you asked a question?
No, I haven't asked a question.
Do you have?
Now that you ask me, I was one. It's a very simple question, but what's like the importance or the role of breath awareness in the process of being or?
Okay, breath awareness.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, breath awareness is one of the is one technique that people use in meditation. Another technique that works similarly would be a mantra, where they have a sound that they just keep repeating in their mind. That's a different one. Sometimes people use optical things, where they'll trace a mandala with their eyes or watch a candle flicker, those kinds of things. What's going on there, and why the having your intention on your breath? It's a way of filling the mind with non-operative stuff. You see, when you're trying to get the mind to let go of thoughts, let go of operations, trying to get the mind to stop analyzing, to stop jammering all the time, one way to do that is to give the mind a task that is non-operative. In other words, it's boring. It doesn't mean anything. It becomes so rote that you kind of set your mind free. A mantra does that by just putting the same sounds in your head all the time. It's like fluff in your consciousness that has no meaning. And a breathing will do the same thing. You pay attention to your breath. You breathe in and you breathe out, and you pay attention to that process. And pretty soon that just kind of fades into nothingness, which then leaves you in a good meditation state. So the awareness of breath doesn't really have any magical components other than the fact that it's a way of controlling thoughts in the mind by offering you a non-operative function for your mind to do. And typically it's used by beginners, including the mantras like that too, and the mandalas, all of them are like that. Mostly it's beginning meditators need to do that in order to help them have clear, empty minds, in order to get that point consciousness state where you're just a point of consciousness floating in the void. Eventually, you don't need that tool anymore. So the breath awareness is a tool, like the mantra is a tool to help you learn how to meditate. Once you're a really good meditator, you tend to let it go. You don't have to really be aware of your breath or the mantra or anything else. You just kind of let this reality go, and there you are, floating in the void. It becomes an easier thing. So that's what it is. It's a technique, a tool that we use to help us let our minds relax and let go of all our analytical judging behavior. Does that answer?
Yeah, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay, so I think it's about time that we wrap up here. Tom, did you have any? Oh, Ishta, did you have something? Sorry, I saw Ishta's video come on. Did you have something? I'm unmuting you. No, okay.
Oh,
yeah.
I did, but I don't know. It's totally colder.
It's what?
It's totally fine to wrap up. It was really lovely having you here, Tom. I really enjoyed it.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, no, this has been really great. We've gotten a lot of positive feedback from people that are just messaging me here and there. Yeah, really wanted to thank you for your time, Tom. You're always very generous with it. And as a public figure, especially, that really means a lot. It shows that you really care about the work that you do and the people that you work with.
What else is there?
Yeah.
That's all the meaning. That's where all the meaning comes from.
Yeah, absolutely. Amen. So cool. So yeah, we're going to put this up on YouTube. And it should be up, in the next 48 hours or so. I'll put it on my YouTube channel. And Tom, if you want a copy of it, I don't know how to do that, but we can work that out.
Okay. Get in touch with either Donna or Keith at mbtevents.com.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And they either will just use your link and point to it, because I want to put it on my website. I mean, on my, not website, but YouTube. I'd like it to go on my YouTube site as well. And then you can do that with a link, though. We don't actually need the whole thing. But sometimes they like to get the whole thing just for posterity, so it goes in the archive. And if they do that, they'll make an arrangement to give you some monster drive that you can upload it to, or some other way to, handle the big files, so that it's one of those things you just put on at night, and hopefully it'll be done by the morning when you wake up, kind of a file transfer. But I don't know. They let them choose how they want to do it. Maybe a link will be all they want, or maybe they'll want more. Okay.
All right. You got it.
But it was very good. And I want to thank you, and I want to thank all the people that came, because there were a lot of really good questions. It was interesting. And if you say people learned something and you get a positive comment, then it can't get any better than that. That's good. I always tell people before I leave, don't believe anything I say. Don't believe a word of it, but hopefully you'll think about it, and it'll be something that you'll put there in that somewhere between the 1 and 0 of probability, and just let it rattle around in your mind until your own personal experience can either validate it or throw it out. So hopefully I've given you something to think about.
Perfect. Is that you, by the way? Is that your phone?
That is mine. Phone isn't even supposed to be in this room, but it got left in here, and
okay.
That's me ringing.
Maybe that's the larger consciousness system calling.
Could be.
Okay. Perfect.
Well, thanks, Mike, for putting it all together.
All right. Have a great night.
Okay. We'll see you later.
See you. Take care. Thanks,
Bye.
everybody.
Thanks.
Good night.